Making sure you're ready. Thank you. Okay, call this meeting to order for the special meeting Committee of the Whole, Water 2019 Water Wastewater Budget and Operating Budget. We'll be going through the Water Wastewater Budget first. Madam Clerk, any introduction of addendum or delegation items?
There are no addendum or delegation items this evening.
Okay, motion to confirm the agenda. Councillor Wells, Councillor Bodner. Questions? All those in favor? Carried. Disclosures of interest on this part of the meeting? Okay, no delegations. Can I have a mover and a seconder for Corporate Services Department Finance Division Report number 2019-29, subject proposed 2019 water and wastewater rates? Carry Councillor Wells, Councillor Beauregard. Peter, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this evening we're going to be starting with the water wastewater budget, and I'm going to be going through a presentation which basically covers everything that was pretty much in the report that was provided to council in a smaller dose of information. So we'll go through this through the whole budget, and then come back, I guess, to the recommendation in the report at the end for council. In the middle of my presentation, I'll be turning over a small section of it to Chris and Darlene to explain some of the matters with regard to unbilled water, and they'll be going through that point of the presentation, and that will also sort of also go into the second item on your agenda, which is the memo that from Chris and Darlene with regard to the water consumption. So it'll sort of be a combination we get through there. So going forward, the first thing I wanted to address is the difference between the fixed and the usage charge, because I think there's some confusion as to why we have a fixed charge and why it's not all a usage charge. So basically, when you're looking at water and wastewater operations, they both incur fixed and usage costs, and usage meaning basically variable. It's dependent on something happening. So in the water and wastewater, the only true usage cost is related to the purchase of the water that flows through a customer's meter and the treatment of the wastewater, which is billed to the customer. So when you look at all of the costs that you've seen in the budget, salaries, materials, contract services, all those things are really basically fixed costs. The water that flows through your meter is billed out based on the usage of that. So that's the real usage charge or usage component of the water bill. Needless to say, there's a number of our costs that are billed as part of the usage charge, but in a perfect world, I guess, all of the fixed charges would be on the fixed costs would be on the fixed charge, and the only amount that would be billed on the usage would be the flow of the water that goes through and that we purchase from the region. So with that said, when you look at the city's operating cost, about 29% of the city's operating costs are allocated to the usage rate, although majority of it is a fixed cost to the city. No matter what we do, we have to pay our employees, we have to pay for some of the utilities, we have to pay for contractors, we have to pay for materials, and so on. So technically they're fixed, but they're billed out as usage, as variable. The city's capital or debt cost, which makes up about 24% of our budget, is allocated to the fixed charge. And that is an actual fixed cost. There's so much that we allocate for capital, and there's so much that we have allocated for debt. The balance of the budget, which is about 47%, is water that we purchase from the region. So we purchase the water from the region. We then distribute the water through our water system, and so 47% of our budget is based on that. Of the 47%, the region bills us 52% of that is fixed cost or unbilled water. So there is a portion of what the region bills us is strictly a fixed cost. They give us a fixed amount, and the balance of it, which is about 25% of their budget and 75% of their budget, they allocate on our usage. So essentially 48% is actually a true usage cost. So 48% of what we buy from the region actually goes through the meters and is a real true usage cost. The balance is fixed. So that's the difference between those two. So moving forward, these are the same numbers of percentages down the right-hand side, but what you'll see is our city operating budget is about $1.5 million, which makes up 29% of our budget. The city's capital or debt is about $1.2 million, or 24%. And then I've split out the region's cost to the city. The first is $1.2 million, which is fixed or unbilled water. So we can't, it's not billed, we can't collect sales from anybody. So basically that's a fixed component. The balance of our budget is about $1.1 million from the region, and that is about 23% of our budget, and that is the actual water that flows through the meters that we actually can bill our customers for. So that's the difference between that. So in total, when you add up all of those four items, there's a total of the fixed cost is about $2.4 million, which makes up about 48% of our budget. And the actual variable cost or usage cost, which is the region's $1.1 million and the city operating of $1.5 million, that makes up the $2.6 million, which is about 52% of our operating budget. So when you look at an average residential property that uses about 3/4 of a cubic meters per day, the annual fixed charge that we charge is about $384, or 52%, and the annual usage charge, which is based on a usage fee and the amount of flow going through the meters, is about $359 for a total of $743 annually for the year. And that shows you the split between what is usage cost and what is the actual fixed cost. So you'll see that majority of what we pay to the region is actually fixed because we can't collect revenue because it's not going through the meters. Majority of the city's operating budget, although it is on the usage charge, it is actually a fixed cost. So what happens is, if we don't sell enough in water purchases, we don't sell enough to our customers, we're not collecting that revenue, then it also means that we're not able to cover the operating costs of our expenses, because we're still going to be paying those costs no matter what happens, no matter how much revenue we take in from customer sales that goes through the meters. So the issues that are affecting the 2019 budget, I'll go through a number of things that we had to look at and that affects the cost of the budget. Is in 2018 we did have a small water deficit of $281,000, and we budgeted that or covered that deficit through not allocating some funds to our capital reserves. So what happens is, if we don't have collected enough revenue or enough sales to cover our costs, we end up with a small deficit or a deficit, and which means that we can't, in order to cover that deficit, it either will come onto this year's budget, 2019, and add to the cost in order to recoup those dollars, or we've been able to fund it through just not spending in the capital side. Same with the water, the wastewater. We had a $435,000 deficit, and the same thing. So the budgeted capital that we did have was not allocated to the capital reserves to cover off that deficit. Now, $160,000 of that $435,000 was due to something it's called the wastewater reconciliation. And what that is especially for the newer counselors, is that is a reconciliation that's basically a year behind that the region does. And so the region charges every municipality a fixed fee for wastewater, a fixed cost. doesn't matter how much what the flows are and what the usage is. What happens is after a year has gone by, they're able to reconcile exactly what the cost was to each municipality based on their costs and what they charged out to the municipalities and collected from us. And so some years they've collected too much money from the city and they owe us money back, and that has to happen in the past. And then there's other years that our flows and our costs are greater than what they charged us, and therefore we end up owing them in a year from now, which in this case is $160,000. The previous year we were in the reverse, where they overcharged us $181,000. So it flips back and forth depending on the season. Another issue that what we didn't do this year was increase our capital allocation. So normally we would try to increase our capital allocation for capital projects anywhere between 2% and 5%. So there's no increase in 2019 to try to keep the rates lower. The region passed their budget, and their increase to water that they would bill to the city for our usage and for the customers' usage was 2.77%, and wastewater was 6.65%. So the cost that the region bills to the city, we have to incorporate into our overall budget, which was the next one. The increased cost then, the region increased water purchases in our actual budget is 2.47%, and wastewater treatment is about 4%. So you'll see that how it affects the city's budget is a little lower than what the actual increase in the operating budget was for the region. We also included in 2018, what was passed was hiring another water operator, of which in 2018 we put 3 months of the budget in the budget of 2018, so 9 months was remaining, and so that was added into this budget for this year, plus a 2.5% cost of living. You'll see as I get to the end of our presentation, that particular operator is vacant right now, so there is some cost savings in not hiring that person just yet, and so the overall budget that you're going to see of the 4.5 or 4.49% we can reduce down to about 3.89% as the overall increase. So we have some savings, but next year in 2019, once that person is hired, that's going to have to be put into 2020 budget. Other areas that need to be mentioned is that the actual annual water revenue is not meeting our projected annual revenue, which I mentioned before, of about $275,000, which means our water rates are too low to cover our expenses. And in the past, you've seen our water sales have been declining. So as your water sales decline, our revenues decline, but our costs continue to increase. Wastewater, we have a wastewater rate stabilization reserve. In 2018, we allocated $300,000 of that to the budget. This year, we've reduced that to $200,000 into the 2019 budget. And as you know, wastewater flows are very unpredictable, and I know Chris and Darlene will probably speak to this later. Extraneous flows are mainly due to weather and lost revenue. Wastewater revenues are currently not meeting our projected revenue, and in 2018 it was about $673,000. In 2017 it was almost $900,000, and so with what we're doing, what we did in 2018, what we're doing in 2019, that number is coming down, so we're sort of phasing that in. And our wastewater meter sales have declined over the years from 1.8 million cubic meters to 1.2. So you can see the decline that's happening, and as that decline happens, then our revenues are also declining. Also, industrial facilities have a big impact on our system, and industrial facilities have reduced or have been eliminated in their own wastewater flows from about 50% to about 6% and that started in late 2017 into 2018 and now 2019. So as soon as a lot of the industrial facilities come off our system, then again the revenues considerably are dropped off, and our costs don't change, but our revenues are declined, and therefore that's why last year we had a larger increase in rates. So the next point was it impacts our rates to generate revenues, which offsets the extraneous flows. And I mentioned before, a major customer came off the wastewater system in 2019, which was about $600,000 in revenue. And in 2018, it affected us by about $900,000 as a full year. So you can see the effect that has on our system. One way of which Council's already addressed is trying to get a more extensive storm sewer system to reduce sources of extraneous flows going into the system. And then, as Council has approved already with regard to a storm sewer fee schedule and taking it off the levy, so we can get more work done in the storm sewer area. And finally, a new 10-year water financial plan is required for 2019, so you'll be seeing a report that Darlene and I are going to be working on over the next month. So hopefully by the end of March you'll be seeing that, and that'll sort of project out where we're going to be going over the next 10 years. So in order to mitigate some of the changes that we've had, staff have ongoing monitoring of flows. They're planning of infrastructure replacements, meter installations, private service leakage, and regional trunk mains review, which is something that Chris will speak to in a little bit. We're phasing in our actual unbilled water and extraneous flows in wastewater, so we're phasing that into so it doesn't affect us all in one year. We know that we have some revenue shortfalls, so we're phasing that into the budget. This year we have no increase to capital contributions to keep the rates down. And we're phasing in the addition of the one certified operator. As I mentioned, 3 months last year and 9 months this year, but with the vacancy, we're able to recoup some of those savings and change the budget a bit, and you'll see that at the end. Again, I mentioned we're applying the wastewater rate stabilization reserve to capital, $200,000. And we did apply a cost of living increase of anywhere between 2 and 2.5% on our city operations. So what does that mean? It means that our wastewater overall budget is about 4.49% increase, which is about $69 annually, or $5.78 per month. What that means is the water fixed in usage increase is about 3.5%, or $25, and the wastewater fixed in usage increase is about 5.3%, or $44. With the change that we've consulted with the mayor, and with the change and Chris with regard to the vacancy that we do have, and with that said, that 4.49% potentially could come down to 3.89%, 3.98%. So looking at the water operations itself, with that our rate increase would go from 1.27 to 1.31. $1.31 from $1.27, or 2.89%. And just a matter of interest, the water financial plan that we did 10 years ago, for 2019, it was projected that our rate would be at $1.35 basically. And so if we do our $1.31, we're getting close to where we predicted it would be 10 years ago. The average increase is about $10 on usage. On the fixed charge, service charge, which is the capital rate, and that's all of the capital components that we talked about earlier, would go up about 4% from $369 to $385, which is about an average increase of about $15 annually. So blended, the overall rate increase for water would be about 3.5%, or about $25. With that, the regional water purchases that we purchased from the region increased about $58,000 to almost $2.4 million, which makes up about 47% of our budget. The city's operating costs increased about $108,000, majority due to the new operator coming on board. And our overall cost is about almost 1.5 million, or 29% of our budget. And our capital actually had a decrease of $100. It was basically kept the same of $1.2 million. So overall, the net increase in our operating capital cost is about 3.4%, or $166,000. Of that, non-billable water loss averages anywhere between 27 and 40% over the last 10 years. We've budgeted that our water unbilled amounts would be about 36% is what's included in this budget. And our 3-year average, we get billed by the region based on a 3-year average, and our 3-year average that's being billed for 2019 is about 3 million cubic meters. So again, overall our fixed costs are about 48% that we're budgeting, and 52% for our is regional fixed costs. So what we do purchase or get from the region is a cost that we have no choice but to pay the region based on their fees. How does that compare in 2019 to our water financial plan? So I had mentioned that our proposed rate is $1.31. Our water financial plan 10 years ago predicted that we'd be at about $1.35, so we're fairly close. What you will notice is on the water financial plan, the usage cost was about $369 annually, and based on our proposed rates, it's a little lower at $359. But you'll notice the fixed charge has changed. So the fixed charge would have been about $345, but it is actually at about $385, and about $30 overall increase. And that's again due to the fact that we've been shifting a lot of the costs that are fixed onto the fixed component, because our operating costs don't go away, and if our revenues decline and we can't meet our sales revenues, we have to cover our costs, else we start running deficits, as other municipalities have run some major deficits because they're not actually covering their costs. So that's why there's been a bit of a shift in the philosophy as to where our revenue should be coming from the fixed versus the usage charge. So this was in your in the report that went to council. And it's just, again, a breakdown of all of the total costs, which is about $5 million to run the water system. And you can see that about $2.6 million is based on consumption costs or usage costs. So and then the fixed cost is about just under $2.5 million. But you can notice, you can see how there's all of the costs that are in the consumption. Contract services, salaries and wages, administration fees, materials, those are all under the usage cost, and really they're fixed costs. And that's the difference between how you can incorporate your fixed revenue versus your usage revenue that comes from metered sales. So the fact that you'll see the regional water purchases of about $2.4 million, 1.1 million is under the usage, because that's what is actually flowing through the meters. That's what we can collect in revenue through the meter sales. But the $1.2 million is unbilled due to various reasons. And that is on the fixed costs, and those are dollars that we have to generate revenue on in order to cover those costs. So the water capital program, we have current contributions of about $1.2 million. And that's made up of rate stabilization amount of $285. Capital projects is about $356. We have debt of about $434,000. Equipment, and you see we put some into water meters also on an annual basis. Our proposed annual increase for this year is 0. And our annual requirement based on replacement costs, and this is where the asset management planning comes in, is about $2.3 million if we had to replace on an ongoing basis. So you can see that we are shy of that number, and that's the number that we should be trying to raise in order to continue to improve our infrastructure. Our annual amortization of our assets is about $600,000, so that's the historical cost, basically, $600,000, of which we're putting $400,000 or $500,000 into capital. But if you were to go to a full replacement cost, you're looking at $2.3 million annually. And this is where I'm going to turn over to Chris to talk a little bit about the memo that is in your package with regard to water consumption and unbilled water. And I know Darlene put this slide, or this, what do you call it, graph, together for council, so that it gives an explanation of what we purchase from the region on a monthly basis and what we actually meter on a monthly basis. So I will turn that over to Chris.
To you, Mr. Mayor, and the rest of council. If you look closely at this graph that's on the screen presently, this is a representation of our ability to now do monthly meter reads and match those meter reads with what we're getting from the region with regards to their sales to us. And as you note, this is over the last approximately 18 months, and when we've had this ability. And you will notice that how the red line on the graph is the actual sales to the city of Port Colborne from the region, and the bottom line is our sales to our customers. And you will note over the last 18 months that through the efforts of staff, we've been able to decrease that difference and actually start to shrink our unaccounted for water. And this is strictly based on the fact that we've been active in our leak detection programs, in our repair programs, and we've been really pushing forward on this and being very proactive, staff has, over the last 12 months in particular, and that really reflects in this particular graph. There's a bar graph also in Peter's demonstration for those who don't like squiggly lines and prefer up and downs, and that can be explained at that time. What we're noticing, exactly, here's the bar graph here. If you notice here the difference between, as you move to the right of the screen, you can see that the difference between what we actually get billed by the region and what we're actually billing our customers, that difference is becoming smaller and smaller as we proceed forward. So that's an indication to us that we're going in the right direction with regards to finding the leaks and repairing them. And that's been a very active thing going forward. And that is one of the reasons why the request for the extra staff person, because what that allows us to do then is to be more proactive and get multiple crews on site, react to leaks quicker, find those leaks quicker, and that's a very good indication of how we've been able to proceed. We're actually quite happy with that. It's a move in the right direction, and it's a very positive thing for us. It's very motivating for staff to know that they're actually starting to wrestle this thing to the ground. What we have today, to quote one of the other councilors from a couple of meetings ago, this situation that we find ourselves in didn't happen overnight, and we're not going to be able to fix it overnight. This is an ongoing thing that we have to track and trace and continue to work at diligently. Just as for the record, this is some of the numbers that have come out. Just today, I had staff do the first quarter of 2019. And in the first quarter of 19, particularly in January and February, we've actually had the meter reads. And we have decreased those numbers again by an additional 6.9% in January and another 12% in February. So that's an indication that we're continuing to do those things that we hoped we'd be able to achieve. We're optimistic that we'll continue on that path. Staff has done, we've actually had one conference we hosted in-house where we brought a tech company in. We shared this technology with, they shared it actually with us and 4 or 5 other municipalities that we invited to the table. And these are the types of technologies that we're looking at to investigate problems even more so and to find more leaks. We are going to hopefully partnership with the region and some of the stuff on their mains. We've had some initial discussions with them on that. That will proceed forward. The staff's intent is to get some numbers, bring a program forward on that, and try to shrink this discrepancy even more so as we go forward into 19 and 20.
Kerry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Only because it's timely where Chris is at. It's great that we're getting more timely information. I was just wondering, Chris, if you're able to see those flow rates from the region on on a real-time basis, daily, in terms of that reaction time getting better now that you're doing these monthly checks on it, can you actually plug in and see their information on a daily basis? So if a blip happens, you're able to react then rather than days later?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruno. I'll let Darlene answer the particulars on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruno. We actually are getting more information from the region than ever. We can't currently see the daily flows from the plant or hourly, but the region's working on it. They have a SCADA program. They're having some issues with the software and with the interfaces, but once they get that sorted out, they've committed to give all the municipalities access to SCADA, so we'll be able to see the flows in real time coming from the plant. Currently, the reason we were able to get the data for February so quickly is the plant manager actually sent me the all of the February consumption Friday. So I was able to see the daily flows in February and compare it to what we were actually getting from our meter reads that we also did on Friday. So that's how we were able to get such timely data.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Harry?
Through you, Mayor, to Chris or Darlene. We can see this, and this is great work. I really applaud it because what's not measured is not managed. So this is great. However, this is only one side of the coin. This is only the water. What about the wastewater? Do we have meters on that? Or do we have meters on the regional trunk lines for wastewater? How is that impacted?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Wells. We don't have any meters on specific locations within the system. The region has pump quantities, obviously. They have that information with what they pump through their force mains, and then they have the billing section back at the treatment facility. We don't have a way presently of tracking where those areas are or what those volumes are. That would be something that we would have to move forward on in the future. That's part of the reason for the capital reserves that Peter talks about, trying to implement these programs. They cost money, and we intend to, at some point in time, wrestle them to the ground as well.
Thank you, Councillor. But Chris, we do our due diligence with regards to our pipe system for the sanitary side, where you do have a program where you go in and make sure for infiltration purposes where those leaks are.
To you, Mr. Mayor. What we actually do now with staff, what we've done actively, we're starting to do it more so than we've ever done, is we're doing those investigations as you had indicated. And we're trying to find those leaks quicker. So that's the process. It involves staff, it involves time. But that's part of that being proactive as opposed to reactive. The intent is to continue with that process, those types of programs. If we have serious problems, we can usually locate those, and the next process is to then react to those and repair those as quickly as possible. That then will get those extraneous flows under control. We've done work with granting funds through the region and through the province with regards to CSO, or combined sewer overflows. We've worked on those programs. We're in the process of implementing more of those as time goes on. Those actively involve, though, and include storm sewer works, because you can't divert stuff if you don't have a place to put that clear groundwater or rainwater. So that's a work in progress that will happen over the years ahead.
Yeah, so with regards to the councillors, a number of years ago we did a program in Westport Gardens where we got the eaves troughs, the sump pumps, and those things off the sanitary side and back into the ditching side in that area. There are areas up in the Borden end of Steel Street where we have a huge issue with eaves troughs, downspouts, and sump pumps. However, as staff has mentioned, there's no place to put that water. So what goes hand in hand is another issue we're going to be talking about, is the stormwater side, where we can get it out of there. So we're not paying to clean water. But those, in certain areas of our community, those two go hand in hand. We should see fruits of our labor, or the last council's labor, with regards to the Nicholas Street project in the stormwater system over there, getting everything off the sanitary and into that stormwater system. So those are proceeding, but as you know, Chris, that was, what was the total value of that project?
Well, Nicholas Street is going to be approaching $9 million when it's finished. And in that exercise, we were able to take in excess of 200 sump pumps and illegal connections from the sanitary out and put them into a design storm sewer, which was deeply needed.
Yeah, so if you look at that area that's now completed, you've got Linwood, Homewood, Ridgewood, all the woods forest. That's another area without storm waters. You've got the Silver Street area, you've got Humboldt, Wellington area, another area without a full storm water system. So, you know, these are things that we have to work our way towards, and I think with both staff and I think at the direction of this council, that's where we all want to get to, but they have been working diligently. So, as Chris mentioned, this isn't just an overnighter here. This is going to be a long-term plan that the city has to deal with. So I do applaud them what they've done. Any further questions? Councillor Dan?
More of a comment there. I spent a couple minutes with Peter today. We talked. Now that we're done with all the percentages and $1 million. Thank you. And all the 52% and stuff like that. The region's getting $210.33 from the average homeowner and residential business. That's $840.92 a year. I think the biggest winner on our water here is the region. And I think they're the ones that we need to go after to get them to reduce. I mean, this is my personal water bill from home, including the Christmas season, a little bit of visitors. 28 cubic meters of water I use in my house. We're pretty conscious. I have the proper toilets and whatnot. My water bill is $282. 2 people in a house, that's like a couple of retirees and stuff like that. I think the biggest winner is the region, and those are the guys we should be going after to get them to reduce what they're charging the people. I mean, the water costs next to nothing, and maybe we could get the region to back off a little bit. We could charge a little bit more for the water, and maybe even things out a little bit. I mean, there's lots of leaks in the city. I know I bitched to Darlene there a little bit about my own personal problems, and she's sitting there saying nothing to me. But I don't know. Like I say, I think we should be going after the region. I mean, we got a water tower in Port Colborne that was there when a lot of us were kids. They're priding themselves on this new one they got. Holy cow, what took you 65 years to put up? You know, I mean, Mr. Region, I think we should be going after that guy. That's a personal note, but I'm sure I'm not the only one. Thank you.
Comments to that?
To you, Mr. Mayor, and to Councillor Danch. We can discuss those things with the region. As you have noted, there's a large section of our bill that has an increase that is directly related to the region. You know, and I can't speak to their costs or how they've calculated those in any way, shape, or form. I'll leave that up to the regional councillors and staff to do that.
Yeah, I mean, our big issue at the region is capital costs. And that's where they get their money from, is to sell you water to pay for new water treatment plants or upgrades to existing ones. The second on the wastewater side is rebuilding new plants across Niagara. Welland just went through a huge rebuild probably about 10 years ago. The Grimsby water plant, which is actually getting another upgrade to it, was new. There's going to be a brand new water treatment plant in Niagara Falls. There's a $2 or $4 million decommission cost to the Niagara Lake pond system that they had. So that's where they get their money for that. So as they get closer to the number that Peter had, which was I think about 2.3 million that we should be spending a year on fixing what we have, and we're about $1 million shy of that, they're trying to get closer to that number too. The unfortunate problem in the past 4 to 6 years is that, I'll put it in my terms, you were kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul in artificially keeping rates down. So now it's, you know, chickens come home to roost, as they say. So now you're seeing larger increases. But, you know, it's all fine and dandy to be able to come to you and say it's a zero tax increase or a negative water increase. But there are no negatives. I think Chris has the number that he gave us there. I think the index cost is 3.5 points now with regards to information that he has there. Chris, do you want to touch on that for a second? Because we discussed this today.
Through Mr. Mayor, to yourself and the rest of council. Yes, actually, this came across my desk first thing this morning from CanDat Construction Cost Index ratings, and it's done for the entire year for 2018. And the national average in Canada is 2.5% increase. I'm sorry, 3.5% increase. So that's the cost of living slash index cost of building and maintaining infrastructure buildings in Canada, which is really not that far from what we're actually asking for increasing here. If I may note, though, and to sort of reiterate more on what the mayor has talked about, is that this issue of failing infrastructure isn't just a common thing in Port Colborne and the Niagara region. This is North American-wide. I mean, there was a huge expansion in North America with the expansion of waterworks, sewer works, and collection systems. And those have aged now to the point where they're starting to fail. And there's been, over the past 30 years, underfunding of all those at all levels of government. And so this is what we're starting to realize now, is the shortfalls of those decisions made in the past.
Yeah, because most of those infrastructure projects were done in the 1950s, 60s, so their lifespan is done, and now it is now. I mean, the unfortunate part about it, and if you can see across the region, the number of plants that have been replaced. Luckily in Port Colborne, ours are fairly new compared to the rest of the system. Ours go back to the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. So we were a little bit ahead of the curve with regards to our two facilities. So, I mean, both of those were actually moved from their previous sites. So, you know, we are lucky in that aspect here. But, however, we all pay for the whole region as far as these plants go and the main trunk line. So, but I know staff in my discussions with them and my discussions with the region is that we're going to work hard with the region with regards to our situation here in Port Colborne with their trunk mains for fresh water and the sewage side of it to make sure that we're not paying for leaks on their side. So, but those are the discussions we're having with them right now. So, Councillor Bodnar, I think you had a question?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Chris. On the water side, Chris, non-billable water loss, we're budgeting about 36%. Now, just so people watching don't think we'll ever get to zero, what is a acceptable, I mean, we'd like to get to zero, but what is an acceptable water loss in, say, the average municipality?
The North American average for an excellent system is about 15 to 18%, and the average system is between 20 and 25.
Chris, do you just want to explain so everybody understands exactly in that unbillable water what is all included?
Well, there's a number of things, to you, Mr. Mayor, and the rest of council. There's a number of things that are unbillable. And if you look at some of the notations that are in the documents that have been supplied to you in the reports, that details everything from something as simple as flushing the mains for maintenance purposes, for sampling the mains, because we're mandated that we have to provide so many samples based on our distribution system. So that involves water that is unbilled. There's water that we use in the construction process for contracts. Those are unbillable, that we use for dust control, if you would. There's things that we use for firefighting. We track those, but we can't bill for them. So we know what those quantities are, and they are part of that process, and part of calculating, which actually shows the difference. There's a number of maintenance things that we can do that in the past 12 months or so, we've actually been very cognizant of that and trying not to waste any water in that process. So we've been able to cut back on our sampling, but still meet all the provincial requirements and have no adverses. We've been able to cut back on some of our flushing programs and being more efficient at those, picking them at more strategic places. So those are all some of the costs that go into that unbillable water that we need to operate the system that we can't turn around and collect for because they don't go through a specific meter, AKA a customer.
And getting rid of dead ends like the Lakeshore project that was done a number of years ago, right, where I mean, there was times over there we had for months a fire hydrant with a meter on it. As you said, we can't bill for it because we're the customer.
That's correct.
And it ran and ran and ran just to keep the
that is an associated
all the numbers together for the province.
Yes, that's an associated cost with us keeping the water quality up. We've since done capital works out there that have eliminated the need for those expenses through unbillables. The Lakeshore water main was an example of that. That was funds that we were actually able to leverage through a grant so that we On that particular project, we did a $2.8 million water main, and it only cost the ratepayers on their water bills $800,000 of that 2.8, because we were able to use provincial grants. So that's something that we were working at the staff level on a continual basis with Peter and his group, getting grants, doing those applications in, and trying to secure funds wherever possible to offset the actual rate itself.
Thanks, Chris. Gary?
Thank you, Worship. I wonder if Chris could venture a comment on this, but one of the things that I recall, the criticism of the region often is that they're collecting a lot of money in reserve to fix what arguably is the big ticket items, plants. I mean, you know, we're talking multi-million-dollar things here, trunk lines. So, you know, they are taking responsibility of a heavy load of high-ticket item infrastructure. Having said that, one of the reasons for that infrastructure, I'm sure, has to be the volume of flows either coming out of water treatment plants or coming in. Extraneous flows, large million-gallon tanks to hold water until it can be cleaned. And I'm just wondering, from a regional perspective, if the focus is on, and I know they're under pressure to handle it, some of these large volumes that they're putting money aside for on plants and storage, when perhaps if some of that money was redirected in partnership to municipalities so that they could fix those volume issues, they then don't need the plants to handle that kind of volume. So the root cause can be what's going into those plants in terms of their longevity, them being replaced, them being expanded. And so the criticism that I've heard is that often they have large reserves and they keep building those reserves, but they're not, always putting them all into action. I mean, you know, the one thing about water and wastewater, it's pretty time sensitive. I mean, you got to treat it and use it, and it happens all rather quickly. And I'm wondering if, Chris, you see any cause to look at more partnerships to fix the entry level, at the lower level, these flows, whether they be wastewater or whether they be water treatment. Are they, in your opinion, doing enough? Should council and councillors at the region be looking at more of a shift in those funds to help, I know what I wanted to say, the word I wanted was upstream, before it gets there, problems that we could work on that doesn't then require them expending large amounts at the downstream end?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Bruno and to the rest of council. First of all, I'd like to speak in the region's defense because they have, in the past number of years, initiated what's been known as the CSO program. And we've been very beneficial in that process, the City of Port Colborne has, in securing granting funds from them to help us build storm sewers. I mean, they contributed close to $1 million to the Nickel project for that. And that's all part of a fund that they had created, sort of, as you put it, in simple terms, a payback, if you would. So they have been active in that process and hopefully will continue to. It all depends on the regional budgets and the funding and, as you say, the reserves and how they allocate those, and that's a decision they make at a higher level. But we've been very diligent in trying to recoup as many of those dollars as possible to the City of Port Colborne to help us offset some of those capital costs because they are very large, as I said, with the Nickel project as an example.
Councillor?
Just one last thing. Last week at council, I put forward that notice of motion to look at the leakage in the laterals, private and public side of the pipe that comes in from the main. Sort of in formulating that idea was something I read that the last council dealt with back in, I still have the article as a matter of fact, in June of '88. And it talked about the potential problem of lateral leaks. And I think that we're all to the point where, you know, I've been around, some of you here have been, when we did zone meters in the city and all the things Chris has talked about, we've put forward plans and done studies and gotten data, which has helped. But I think this is the frontier that we haven't put time or treasure towards. And so because this meeting has dissected the time by a week, there will be no need to debate or put forward that notice of motion this coming Monday. If I could be so bold, and maybe if this is the right time, to put forward the motion with respect to that water and leak detection on the laterals. I've had a few conversations with Chris, I've had conversations with the clerk, I've had conversations with Peter, and I've come forward with this addendum that I think if we could incorporate it into the strategy behind tonight's rate setting, and I put a timeline on it so that I think Councillor Wells said it better than I did with respect to you have to have measurable data to attack the problem. So if I could, Mr. Mayor, I'll read it out now. That the Director of Operations and Engineering initiate a lateral water service leak detection testing program on all water laterals, both on the public and private side of the curb stop within the calendar year 2019, and that staff establish a financing strategy for capital replacements of water laterals.
So I can take that as a friendly amendment to add to our Corporate Services Finance Division Report 2019-29. I'll need a seconder to that. Councillor Beauregard. So with it being an amendment, is there any discussion on the amendment? Any questions to staff or council? Yes, Councillor.
Chris, hearing what is asked for, is that something that you think has value for money by doing that leak detection?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bodner. What we want to do is we don't want to spend a great deal of money up front. We want to just see what's possible and what's out there, analyze some of the technologies that are out there now, some of the new technologies that have come forward. As I alluded to earlier, we actually had a little conference slash seminar that we'd actually hosted at the Operations Center, which was very enlightening. It was a new technology where they actually send a sounding system inside of the mains, and then they can detect by the volume and then use telemetry to locate where the leak is if they happen to hear one. So that's just one of the new systems that has come out. That works very well in large mains. Obviously it doesn't work on something small because this ball that they send down through the system with all the electronics in it is a fairly decent size. But there are other systems out there that we're looking at. Staff's been investigating, doing some homework on that. And the intent is, at the staff level, is to come forward with some recommendations and then putting some dollars estimated, obviously, on what that would cost, and then bring that to council for a report, at which point then council can decide how they want to spend money on that. Do they want to spend money on it? We'll have some recommendations based on what we find out in our research, and then fund that obviously through some reserves or whatever, but that'll be a decision of council. Hopefully sometime around midsummer, yeah, I would think early fall at the latest, so that we could put a program together, and then whether it's going to take us 5 years or 15 years, whatever it is, whatever the dollars will support, that's the process that we're sort of anticipating going forward.
Councillor?
So, Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Bruno, is that, like, what you're bringing forward is saying we're going to do it, but you've heard the plan, is that jive with what you're asking for? Is what?
Yes, I think part of what Chris is talking about is the after the diagnostics. So, you know, if it was 200,000 or 250,000 to get the metering, listen, get all the data. If you have 5,000 laterals here and, you know, 1,000 are built in the last 10 years, so you got 4,000 left, do that, get the analysis. If it's 400 laterals that are leaking, I mean, there's some pretty good numbers that Chris was quoted on saying as to what a small leak in a lateral can be. Then you'll have the data to decide how to spend the money, how fast to go, how much we contribute to the private side, all that stuff. What I'm talking about is let's get the data to decide how big a problem it is and how fast we want to go on it. So short answer is yes.
Okay, Counselor? So just further to what Chris said, because we've been dealing with this basically even before I was sworn in. There's another system out there that we can do for laterals. It's about the size of a hockey puck. You actually bury it in the front yard of a house. And depending on how far the lateral is between the house you're dealing with and the neighbor, it can measure more than one lateral. But those are type of detection systems that we can go in and check on the private side if there's actually leaks. One thing I want Chris to do is, there was an instance where we had to put a meter out in a meter chamber in front of the house. Chris knows what I'm talking about. I want him to tell you the numbers, because it's astonishing, these numbers. So Chris, if you can give council and the people watching.
To you, Mr. Mayor, and the rest of council. This is one particular location in the city where we'd had the installation of a meter was giving us some issues within a really tight crawl space that was installed in there years ago. And we couldn't get in because we weren't getting reads, so we decided to install a meter pit out at the property line. So we did that, and in the first month's billing, the individual's bill increased tenfold. There was no indication on the site that there was a leak anywhere. There was no leaks found in the home. There was no water lying around in the neighborhood. None of the other properties adjacent to this person showed any water leakage sitting anywhere, no ponding. So then we determined through that process that it must be the service lateral or the service water service that's feeding this property. And it was only a half-inch line. So we informed the homeowner. The homeowner went in and replaced that line, and his water bill dropped. It was determined through the leakage on the meter versus after the fact when we just had replaced the line. He was losing approximately 1,500 liters per day. Per hour, I'm sorry, which equates to an enormous amount. It's over 13,000 cubic meters on that one service line alone on an annual basis. That's just one half-inch water line that nobody could detect, that nobody could hear. There was no surface water. There was no indication anywhere that there was an actual leak. Like, that's a huge amount of water. What that individual property was leaking on an hourly basis was equivalent to about a half a water truck. That's how much was leaking on that one service line. So that gives you an idea of what the potential, and it wasn't a case of anybody's particular fault. It was just an old line that had failed, and there was no way to really know that it had failed, except that we just happened to catch it in this installation of this new meter. So those are the types of things that we want to hopefully investigate and find in these programs that we want to implement going forward.
Counselor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Chris. Has that happened in any other location? Have we been able to detect that, or was that just a special circumstance?
There was one other, but that one was the one that was of the largest numbers as indicated. I mean, to lose a water truck a day like that without ever having any indication anywhere above the surface that this is happening, I mean, that's a large volume.
Okay. What were the other instances like?
Water services in general, depending on the age of them, they will have leaks. And if you look at some of the numbers that I've quoted in the previous report, where it talks about approximately 1,100 cubic meters in a year. So that's a water service line that just has drips. But it will drip anywhere from 1 to 2 gallons an hour. So if you add all those up over time, the number becomes huge. If you multiply that across a couple of hundred services, then that volume that we can't bill for because it doesn't run through a meter, it's leaking into the ground and simply going into the rock or wherever it goes. So those are some of the things that we want to try to investigate with these sounding systems and technology going forward.
Well, mine would be kind of different to that. So.
Okay. I'll go to Councillor Demery first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Bruno, thank you so much for bringing this forward. I think it's time that we got something done without a question. And to Chris, I'm just a little bit concerned with the idea of just saying, yeah, go ahead with this. do the diagnosis and not attach a dollar figure to it. I'd like to have some idea of what it will cost us to get the diagnosis, and I understand once we have that, we'll deal with dollars to fix it later, but what do you think it would cost to get the diagnosis?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Demery. No, that's exactly what staff wishes to do. We'll go out and investigate these things over the next few months and come back with a proposal and what those costs will be to implement a program. And then that program should give us a budget going forward on an annual basis to actually conduct the repairs. But we'd need to definitely get a ballpark figure on where this is going to go to. Is it, like as Councillor Bruno had said, is it going to be $200,000? Is it going to be more? We need to know that.
Okay, thank you. So what we're voting on the amendment to support going out and putting something together to come back to council and tell us this is what it's going to cost to do a diagnosis.
Correct.
Not to actually do it and
No,
then
correct.
pay for it.
Yeah, they'll have to come back with us with what's going to come out of the water budget in order to do this, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Demery, that's correct. And as one of my staff members has just indicated, the more bodies we have, the more we can actually do some of the traditional stuff in-house.
July 1st, you'll have another new one. Councillor Bruno?
Just a last comment, because recently we all might have read in the paper that there was a group online that were establishing, come on, you guys, get some stuff done, and are you spending enough or not spending enough? But one of the things in there that concerned me, and if I read the paragraph out of the article when they interviewed Chris last time, was that this isn't about blame. And one of the things that I read in that article was that, well, if it's on the private side, that's going to cost an individual money. And that's where you're now looking to fix a problem that you guys collectively have. Well, it's not a blame at all. You, as a taxpayer or homeowner who has that leak on the private side, probably don't even know it. It's going into the ground and being lost. So it's not looking for someone to pass the buck to or the dollar for. I'm sure if it gets down the road, we'll come up with a program to try and help that side happen. So I just want the public to understand that looking for leaks on the lateral is looking on the private side. It's also looking from the curb stop sidewalk to the main. So it isn't about trying to find who's going to pay for this. It's about trying to get it fixed. And the faster we get it fixed, the more money we save. And if those numbers quoted to, I think it was Councillor Bodner's question is, if we're spending $400,000 a year on leaks and we should be spending $200,000, $200,000, and I'm not saying that this is going to find it all, but those paybacks get pretty fast if you're looking at $200,000 or $300,000 to do this analysis. And if there was 200 to 400 leaks, which is only 10% of what could be out there, it's probably not unreasonable that there's a lot of this leakage that is happening there. And it's the one area where we really don't have a program or haven't attacked with any vigor. So I say let's get at it and pour gasoline on this one, because I'm looking for some low-hanging fruit and some fixes that can be done sooner rather than later. Because at that kind of money being wasted, we sure could do a lot of testing and repair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, Councillor Baggy, to the amendment? Questions to the amendment? No, it's okay. Okay. To the amendment, because I know you have another one. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So through you, Mayor, to Chris. What Councillor Bruno was saying is that he wants the diagnosis to be completed in 2019, correct? You're saying that we need, so what we are determining is that we want to do research to determine the dollar amounts before we go through and do the diagnosis. Are we going to be able to have this diagnosis completed in 2019? Is that a time frame that is possible or realistic?
Staff?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Beauregard. We would hope that we could get that information to you in reports through the year. First of all, with obviously the cost of implementing a program, what would those be, and then how those would be funded. And then secondly, depending on what they can deliver to us, that would be depending on their timetables, obviously. But I would hope that we could have something in 2019, if not before the 2020 budget for water.
Okay,
Okay, Counselor?
yes, yes, thanks.
To the amendment? Counselor? Yeah?
So we're talking about hiring someone to determine the costs, or you as staff doing a cost analysis. We know we have a problem, we know we have to fix it, so now we're gonna spend money that we could use to fix the problem on figuring out how much it's going to cost us to fix the problem. Is that basically what we're looking at now? Basically doing an analysis?
No, we're not hiring a specific person for this.
But-
We're
right.
There's a person that, we have,
Right.
actually have a vacant position. So by the time we hire that person, it'll be July. So that's what staff's talking about. We do have staff that are there now. In essence, what we want to do is we want to develop a program that we can go out to detect leaks on laterals, whether it's our portion of the lateral or
Right.
the homeowner's
No, yeah.
commercial side of the lateral. So with that type of detection system, and it'll give us a broad view of what's going on in the entire community, how we're gonna go ahead and tackle this. So we can say, so I'll take Kent Street for an example. So along Kent Street in the last 10 years, if there's 50 homes there, 25 of them have replaced their lateral in the last 10 years. Then there's 25 laterals that we don't know how old, 50s, 60s, 70s, who knows. Then we know we can narrow it down that we only need to look at 25 homes in that neighborhood to find out what lines are leaking. Really, that's kind of a pretty broad statement, but that's really what the staff wants to do. Because once we get a handle and bring our lost water, and then hand in hand with this, we'll go the infiltration side on the sewer side, but that's a bit of a different whole ball of wax, which they're dealing with now anyways. But if we can deal with the lost water and bring our number down, which you said was about 34%, down into that 20 to 25%, then we're basically in the average of Canada of lost water. So really that's what we're trying to find. So
I understand all of that, I understand what
So,
you're saying.
but in essence, we're gonna have to figure out, in order to do that, what's it gonna cost us to do those tests in neighborhoods across the city to find the leaks? So that's really what they're gonna do. So they're gonna investigate what's the best detection system.
best way to
how
do
to
it.
implement, how our staff can implement it, so on and so forth, and then move forward from there.
And basically this is done in-house then? We would be,
Staff?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to, excuse me, to the councillor. We are doing some stuff in-house now with current staff and with some of the technologies that we currently own. But these are some of the newer technologies out there that we would go to a consultant that has the specialty equipment.
Specialty
That is
equipment.
very expensive, obviously, and being such a new. So that would be part of that proposal coming back that would give us those dollars and cents. We would ask them to make a proposal to us with some associated costs.
Okay, Counselor?
thank you.
Any other questions on the amendment? Seeing none. Everybody understands what the amendment is? Is there questions during the water?
Not usually, but you can waive the procedure if you want to.
Consensus to waive procedure to have a? Oh, you want a motion, or you want a motion? Yeah, okay. Counselor Demery, Counselor Bagu, all in favor? Okay. So you're gonna have to come up to the podium, name and address, and ask me your question.
Ron Barda, 5474 Fire Lane 22, Port Colborne. To you, Mayor, the question being, there was money talked about coming from the region. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on this, but doesn't the region take 40 to 45% of the city's money now to run things? And wouldn't we expect to get something back from that?
Chris, I think that's what you were talking about, that money is given to the region for what we pay for in water cost and water treatment. That's where that project on the Nickel Street came back to us, correct? Is that what you're talking about?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor, and to the presenter. The funding that the region collects through their fixed rates, through their actual rates per cubic meter, whatever, those are all part of that reserve process and their budgeting. And yes, that's how they fund those. In the case of what we tapped into on the grants, was the CSO program.
Okay.
So that's how they fund that program.
Yeah. So it does come back, that's where it comes back. So money goes out, and then we apply for it for a program that we may want to run that fits their program. That's where the money comes back.
Okay,
And,
thank you.
And we will be working through myself, Councillor Butters, who's our regional councillor, and staff to figure out where we can fit in.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Darlene?
Through Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to add as well that the region's under the same requirements as we are as a municipality with respect to funding water, wastewater. It has to be done through the rates. You cannot get it through the levy.
Right.
So even though the region may take some of our taxes, which the presenter may have been alluding to, they can only take the water from the water rates to fund their water systems. So it's a legal process. They can't take it from your tax levy.
No, but he did mention the percentage on the water side,
Correct.
what we pay. So he was equating it to water.
Okay,
but,
good.
but that is a good point.
Okay, thank
Just
you.
like us, we can't use taxes to fix water.
Correct.
In the city, we got to use it through the water. Okay, so all questions are asked. This is voting on the amendment only.
Could you repeat the amendment, please?
That the Director of Operations and Engineering initiate a lateral water service leak detection testing program on all water laterals, both on the public and private side of the curb stop within the calendar year 2019, and that staff establish a financing strategy for capital replacements of water laterals. Councillor.
Okay. The only thing I'm confused about that, I just wanted to specifically say that they're not to actually start any program, but just come back with a cost first, so that we have that. And you know, it's just doing it the right way. Just make sure we have the cost first.
Yeah, and that's the last line, that staff establish a financing strategy for capital replacements. So,
Before it's implemented.
yeah, that has to come back to us. Okay? We all understand that. Staff understands that on that? Peter? Well, you won't be here anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah. We might just bring it back in. Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment? Carried. Okay, now back to the main motion. Peter, do you have anything else to add to what we've done?
Yeah, I just have to finish now that we've gone through the water part of the budget, I'll just finish up the wastewater, and then I'll come back to our final proposal for the recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
So just to continue our slides.
Microphone?
I'm usually good at that. So what this slide shows you, this graph, is basically showing you that you'll see the dark blue line is the annual cost of purchasing from the region of water, and you'll see the black line is what our fixed charges are. So you can see how our fixed charges have continued to grow since 2014 and on an annual basis. And it actually in 2018 reaches the point where it covers the costs of the region. But again, that only covers the costs of the region bill. We still have the city's portion, which is that $1.6 million, $5 million, which is our cost to operate the system. And the green line is the annual usage sales. So you can see that the usage sales in 2018, we did raise the rate. So you can see the sales have gone up considerably there to try to get to the point where it's going to match what the operating costs of the city are. So that's the direction that we're going in. So you can see we're heading in the right direction, and hopefully we'll continue there going over for the next 10 years. So that's what that shows you. So just to continue on to the wastewater operations, we've sort of talked quite a bit about the water operations. So right now, the wastewater operations, we're looking at an increase of from $1.30 to about $1.33, to about 3%, about $11 annually on the usage. Fixed charge going from $471 to $504, which is about a $32 increase. And blended, that's about a 5.3% increase on the wastewater side. And you can see that the wastewater increase is higher than the water increase, and that's because that's where we're finding majority of our costs, because the majority of the costs that we're paying for in the wastewater is the regional portion of the bill. In the wastewater operations, the region's fixed cost is increasing by about $167,000, and the cost of the regional budget, what we pay, is $4 million, which is about 72% of our budget. So the majority of the wastewater budget is paying the region for treatment of wastewater. Our city operating increase is about $18,000. and our budget is about $863,000, and it's about 15% of the budget. We put in about $752,000 in capital, which is about 13%. So overall, we have about a 3.36% increase in the wastewater budget, or $185,000. The region bills us based on a 3-year rolling average. So no matter what we set in rates, they base our, whatever the rate is for 3,944,000 cubic meters, that's what we pay the region. Our non-billable flows are estimated at anywhere between 45 and 68%. We're budgeting about 56%. And overall, our budgeted city costs are about 28% overall of our budget, and where the regional costs are fixed at 72%, and those are fixed costs that the region bills us. The capital program is about $752,000. Rate stabilization is made up of that, $206,000. Capital projects about $508,000, and equipment about $36,000. In the 2019 budget, the annual increase is proposed to be 0. And I think in future budgets, when we do the 10-year plan, there's going to have to be an annual increase to that at some point in time, where we start increasing our capital program so that we're going to meet the requirements. For example, for wastewater, we should be at about $1.2 million, and the annual depreciation on our assets on a historical basis is $400,000. So there's quite a disparity there that we need to make up that difference over time. Same type of graph shows the difference between the regional costs and our sales. So you'll see that the cost is in the red, and it has sort of flat-lined. But you'll also see the black line is our fixed charges. So you see our fixed charges have been increasing, so we can try to cover the fixed costs that the region's charging us. And the blue line you can see is the annual sales, and you can see how the sales have declined. And that's just a representation of where our water sales have declined, so our wastewater revenues have declined also. So we're not meeting and that's where we're not meeting our operating costs, even though our operating costs are very low, but the extraneous flows is what's costing us more money, and in the cost that we have to pay to the region, which is at 72% of our budget. With that said, just an update as to where we are with regard to our reserves. So you'll see in our water, we have about $920,000 in reserves, and roughly about the same amount in wastewater. And those are there for specific items such as rate stabilizations, operations, equipment replacements, and capital projects. So the overall budget, what we were proposing was a 4.49% overall increase, which is about $69 annually. And you can see the breakdown between water usage fixed and sewer usage and fixed as to the increases on those particular items. So you can see that we are increasing the wastewater or the sewer fixed charge is the majority of the increase in the budget, and that's because of that disparity that we do have in our sales and our revenues that we're generating versus the cost that we're paying for the regional treatment. On a quarterly basis, that's about $17 on an average on a bill. We bill 4 times a year, three months for each quarter, and so it's about $17. And if you convert that on a monthly basis, it's about $6 a month. Now, with that said, what we did recognize was the fact that we do have a vacancy in one of our operators. And in talking with Chris and the mayor, the fact is that if we don't budget for, if we have savings basically, and we don't budget for those 6 months because we don't have to pay for an individual to be here, that we could actually reduce the overall budget from 4.49% of an increase to 3.98% of an increase. It's not a huge amount of money. It goes from about $69 to $61, so we got about an $8 difference. You can see that it affects the water usage rate and the sewer usage rate, and the fixed charges stay the same. So with that said, Mr. Mayor, the quarterly would be about $15 an hour, or $15 per quarter, an additional cost to the bill. So our final recommendation is that we do reduce the budget down to the 3.98%, and we would have an amendment to the recommendation that we have tonight for the water rate to go from $1.311 to 1.291, and the wastewater usage rate would go from 1.336 to 1.327. And that would be our final recommendation, Mr. Mayor, and to be voted on by council.
Thank you, Peter. Questions to staff on the wastewater side? Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Lee. Chris, I don't know if new councilors are aware of this, but your synopsis of the reduction in unaccounted for water in the last couple of months that you mentioned tonight also automatically lowers the revenue in wastewater. So the more we fix leaks and the less unaccounted for water that goes through, are we not actually hurting ourselves in terms, I mean, hurting is the wrong word, it's the right thing to do, but are we not then going to be generating less money, or the fact that it hasn't gone through the meter makes that a wash? So it's not going to affect it, because my concern is that if we reduce one, we also reduce the other.
Chris?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruno. It's a wash, as the way you put it, because the water that we are preventing from leaking is water that we don't bill now, and so subsequently it doesn't affect the sewer rate, because the sewer rate is driven by the billed water rate. So anything we save is pure money in our pocket.
Okay. You had a question earlier, not on the amendment, but on the rest of it.
I already asked it.
You did? You're all set that? Microphone?
You have a question?
Yeah, that's why I asked you.
It not to do with that though, but
that's fine.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff, I guess Peter or Chris. Based on this water meeting, I'm understanding that there's going to be an increase, and as I can't help but think in my head, like the most vulnerable people in our municipality. There are people who are on fixed incomes who may be renting, that have to pay water, and they can't make ends meet, and it's already so high, and we're going to be increasing it. It's easy for some people, it's easier, I guess I should say, for some people in positions like yours that live here that can afford it, but there are people that can't. And I know some municipalities do have some type of credit or grant relief to help these type of people and people in these situations. And I'm wondering, is there anything that we can do to help alleviate some of this? Because all the councillors around here are dealing with this issue, and raising it just causes more pain and suffering for some people.
Peter.
Through Mr. Mayor, I can speak to that. With regard to a rebate program, there's not many municipalities that actually do a rebate program, and I believe the reason why is that if you're going to put a rebate program out there, and let's say you're going to put $10,000 or whatever, $100 a property or something like that, you still have to recoup those dollars within the same budget process, which means everyone else or the rest of the collective consumers of water and wastewater are going to have to pay that additional cost for the rebate program to be in place. Because of the fact that the water system is a sustainable one system, it can't rely on the tax levy as Darlene had mentioned. It's on its own. It's a separate system. So therefore, if there's let's say $5,000 rebate program, that $5,000 has to be built into the budget in order to provide that rebate.
Okay.
And which means it's a wash within it. You're not going to get anywhere. What we do though is anybody that has any difficulty in making payments, we will, and our staff will work with anybody to arrange payment arrangements, whether it be weekly, monthly, amount that they can afford, and we will work with anybody that comes forward and says, listen, we need a little bit of help on paying this. We can't pay the bill this month, but we could pay, you know, so much a week or something like that to help them, that they don't have to put out a large amount of money at one particular time. Our staff will work with them on a daily basis if that's required. So I would suggest that we do that and work with them that way and provide some type, you know, good payment arrangements for anybody that needs to.
Okay.
The other mention is, the other thing I just want to mention is, you know, we've been said, you know, that, you know, our rates are high. I think when you look at across the region, we're not the highest, but we're not the lowest. And the reason being is that I think in Port Colborne what we've been trying to do is being a little bit proactive to make sure that we are generating enough revenues to make our system sustainable. And that's the difference between charging fixed amounts versus the usage amounts, where some municipalities are charging low fixed charges, higher usage amounts, but they're not generating enough revenue. So we're trying to make that, how we can fairly equalize that is what we're trying to do. And just for sake, I have some of the other municipalities and their increases going forward this year. So for example, you know, Welland is at just over 5% of an increase. Fort Erie is at the same 3.98% that we have. Fort Erie is very similar to rate structure that we have. Obviously, the region, their overall increase was just over 5%, which we've incorporated into our budget. Niagara-on-the-Lake their water is 6.94%, and wastewater is 17%. St. Catharines is at 5.28%, and Welland, I mentioned Welland. West Lincoln is at 5%. So the other municipalities actually have higher increases, and which means obviously they're trying to generate their revenues a little bit more, and we're sort of, last year we had a large increase in order to get to the point where we need to, and so therefore this year we can have a little bit more reasonable increase, incorporating the region's increase into it.
Councillor Desmarais, then Councillor Clayla.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I just would like to address Councillor Bogart's comments, because he is exactly right in this. This is a terrible burden for those people who are most challenged financially. But unfortunately, the rebate systems all rely on shifting that burden onto others, and that's a problem as well. For the most part, renters pay their water bill through their rent, so they're not seeing that broken out separately. And for other people who are, again, a fixed income, seniors in particular, who still are in their homes, they do have to bear that cost, and it is very difficult. But there are some programs to help, and I would just say that if anyone does have an issue and that they would like some help, to give me a shout, and I'll point them toward the programs. There are very few, and there are very limited circumstances, but there is some help out there. It's a real problem. It's becoming worse daily.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clayla.
Mr. Mayor, I guess to Chris or to Peter, if I have this straight, actually by doing this, we're actually hopefully going to help people, because my understanding is that the water is billed coming into the home, so it goes through the meter. So we're saying that some of this water is being lost and it's not getting to that meter. It's the same amount of fixed amount of water going out, so your waste is just the same as what comes in as what goes out. So if we have all this water that we're purchasing from the region that isn't reaching that person, whether it's on their side or our side, the savings that we're going to have coming in once we can fix some of these pieces should at the end help both sides of it, both for us and for the people that we're serving with the water. Have I got it right?
Chris.
Through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Clayla. No, you're absolutely correct. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude of something like what you're referring to, is that one particular water service that fed one particular home, that leaked those quantities that I told you, that particular, in a 1-year time frame, undetected, that particular service would have cost the city almost $20,000 in revenue. We supplied it and paid the region, but we didn't collect that almost, well, it's just shy of $20,000 in revenue.
Right.
So what's happening is in one particular service, the entire group that are on the water distribution system are subsidizing through their rates those leaks. And those are the things we want to try to wrestle to the ground, as I said before.
And I think that's what we have to make people understand, that this isn't another big grab. It's about helping all of us on both sides of it, because I really do think that when we're losing that kind of water, it's not all being lost through the households. I think it's got to be some leaks on the other side as well. So I think we've got our work cut out for us, but we have to do it. Thank you.
Councillor Wells?
Through you, Mayor, to Peter. Just a quick question here in regards to the fixed rates. Whether I'm a low user at half a cubic meter a day or I'm a high user at 1.2 cubic meters a day, I pay the same rate, correct? On both the water and the sewer.
That's correct.
And then adding to that is if I were a large industry or even a smaller industry, let's say I'm a laundromat, and I'm going to pay the same rate as my neighbor next door who would be a low usage individual.
Through you,
Peter, correct?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. There are different fixed charge rates. There's depending on the size of the meter, so depending on the pipe size that's coming into your facility. So if it's a laundromat, I'm sure it's a larger size meter. And some of the larger industries would have larger meters, some would have combined meters. And so those meters there's a multiplier factor on the fixed charges. So they are actually paying a higher fixed charge on a monthly basis, where the residential is at the standard meter rate of the $200 and some. So there is a differential between large users and commercial users versus your residential.
And just for clarification on that, is so we have a good understanding on that, is that these rates that you depict here in the reports and in the package and that are just for residential.
Residential, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor.
Chris has another.
Oh, sorry, Chris?
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Wells. Just as an example of what Peter was referring to, in the bylaw that we have proposed to put in front of council if you decide to accept this budget, a typical service to a laundromat, for instance, they have a fixed rate that's 2.9 times more than a residential. And in the case of an industry, for instance, a large industry, it can be as high as 40 times. So that tells you the size of their fixed rate contribution.
Okay. Councillor Baggage, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the bottom line here is just, I'm sitting in the audience, I've sat at home before as a councillor, watched these budget meetings regarding our water, and it's like electricity. You want to save money, so you shut the lights off to save your electrical bill. But the water, you really don't save any money. And this is what I think peeves a lot of people off in this city. And I think one of the things too is we had a major industry come off using our system, $700,000. And from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to take 3 years before we see some savings to the city. We're paying for that $700,000 for almost 3 years. Instead of, if the region would lower it to 2 years, it would save us more money.
Yep, through you, Mr. Mayor. You're right. The fact is that when you're seeing a large industry come off the system that we're paying that we're paying into the system, they were paying a larger sum of money, and so there was a larger revenue source that was coming in from the city to the city for their usage. So when they come off the system, our costs don't change, and the fact that they're off the system, they're not they're not, I don't want to say the word subsidizing, but they're not helping provide enough revenue, I guess, to the system. So in fact, what's happening is, although our costs don't change, our revenues have dropped, and we have to then increase our revenues through the fixed charges or for the through the usage charges in order to compensate for that, or see our expenditures drop, which would be the extraneous flows or the unbilled water. If those were able to drop, and then we don't have to pay the region for those costs, then our expenses are lowered, and then that would offset that. Okay. And that's what we're trying to do in phasing in this over the last couple of years, those different changes that have taken place, so we're not seeing the effect all in 1 year on our rates, on our rate structure.
Okay.
Okay, Councilor.
Just one last question. So the bottom line for all this presentations and paperwork and is 3.98% increase?
Correct.
Total? Not including the $100 we gotta pay on the side for
storm sewer.
The storm sewers.
Correct.
So if you add the $100 storm sewer, what percentage total would it be?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the storm sewer is a separate, is a whole separate utility.
Well, people think water, sewer.
Yeah, the storm sewer was on the tax levy, so we're taking all the storm sewer costs off of the tax levy, and we're going to have a $100 fee that's going to be added on to the tax bill as a collection tool. Yeah. So it's your water bill and water and sewer bill is a utility that's a separate entity on its own. But yes, you're correct. There will be a $100 charge on the tax bill when we finalize the tax billings, and that's our source of collecting the $100 in order to do more work on the storm sewer side, which ultimately could help in the long run, or should help in the long run in the future for the wastewater system.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Just one comment. I don't mind paying $100 out of my pocket, but we better do a good job, because I'm paying you $100. I want to see results.
Councillor Wells.
Just a little question here about the rates, and it may not be significant or not, but do we receive very much in the way of additional revenues from overdue accounts?
Peter?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we do charge interest. It's 2.5%. It's not a cumulative interest. It's a one-time interest if somebody doesn't pay their bill. And yes, it's incorporated into the budget as revenue.
Okay. And then following from that, in order to possibly help cash flow, or maybe we're not worried about cash flow, but to improve that, is there any potential to switch from quarterly to monthly so that we receive payments sooner?
I've been reading our minds over here. We're going to bring that up. Peter, do you want to fill us in on that?
Through me, Mr. Mayor, we've had those discussions internally with staff about the potential of going to monthly billings. As far as the cash flow side of things, it's not so much for our purpose for cash flow, I think, to go to monthly. It may be more for the residents that the bill is lower and they can pay it monthly, and it's more of a plan. Right now, we've had the discussions on potentially going monthly. There's a cost factor to doing that, because now you're putting out monthly bills. We can do the readings very easily because we do the readings now monthly, so it's very easy to get the readings. It's the administration side of it would be more costly, which would add cost to our budget. So we've debated it. We're still not totally 100% sure that it would make sense to go monthly. Maybe bi-monthly, every 2 months, may be a potential way to go that we're going to look at. But for this year, we would still go on a quarterly basis and see and sort of look at what the actual costs would be to us in order to do bi-monthly or monthly billings.
Peter, so by the end of the year, can we have a report come back to us with regards to those options, so council can make a decision?
Yeah, we'd be able to look at what the effects would be based on going to a monthly bill. It's something that we've already discussed and have some information on, and we would probably continue that, yeah. We could do that.
To that question, Councillor Borgard, or something else?
Yeah, that's the question I was gonna ask.
Okay, so take you out of the queue.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just
Yes.
one other thing is, the fact that we're not monthly doesn't stop anybody from paying monthly. So they do have the ability to pay us monthly either through direct deposit, through our pre-authorized payment plan. At this point in the new system, we're still working on that. But there's nothing to stop anybody from, through their banking, paying on a monthly basis, or calling our staff and finding out what that monthly amount would be and making those payments to help them.
Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I wanted to speak to that same issue. To me, it's very simple. When you get a bill that is normally $400 or it's we'll just say $300 to make it easy, whatever. Just set up a payment plan. You pay them $100 a month. On my account, I just went into my account online. Boom, it comes to the city every month. I don't have to worry about it. And I pay a little extra, so I get a free bill every year. But it's what you want to do. But people can do that. I just wonder if we're actively promoting it. We really need to be doing that. It's a much simpler thing than paying the money to bill everybody every month.
I'll work with staff on that, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor. Yeah, yes. Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just wondering if we are going to have that kind of report. I totally agree with Councillor Desmarais that that's the way to potentially manage that. I'm wondering if it is possible, or we could find out the cost of doing a electronic read from one's home, much like you can now do with hydro. So on your computer, you have a dashboard. You can look at what your monthly bill was. The more important reason, because I think the budgeting is the answer for that one, the payment. But now what you get often is somebody who's had a leak who finds out in month 4, and now they have all this problem of playing catch up, and they can fix the leak, but it doesn't forgive the bill and it doesn't forgive our costs. So if we could look at with the remote read, we could put something together with a cost profile to it and what it would affect each bill. You could look at your bill daily and see where things are going, or at least monthly. So I'm wondering if we could incorporate that into that study.
Chris and Darlene, do you have an answer for the councillor's question? Go ahead, Darlene.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruno. We have had meetings with our supplier on how we can automate the system so people could access it on a monthly basis. The estimated cost for the hardware, putting up towers and communications, was about $250,000. We do have a meeting with our supplier tomorrow, who just talked to me last week and said that he actually has a new software that he's going to talk to us about. It's in the cloud. And because we read the meters every month, the software would capture those reads every month, and then our residents would have the opportunity to log in and view their account. We don't have all the details yet. He didn't have all the details either. He had just been told by Neptune, our meter manufacturer, about it, but he's as soon as he mentioned it, I was like, ooh, and he said that would definitely put us in a good position to move to the next phase of putting in the hardware. Of course, there is an increased cost because currently the software was included when we purchased the meters, and there was, of course, a web hosting fee and for having it in the cloud and that. But I'll definitely have more information in the coming weeks on that and see what it would look like and how that could be rolled out potentially and what the costs would be.
Okay, Councillor? Okay, so we have a motion in front of us. Any further questions? Seeing none, before we move on to a vote, I just want to state that this council has taken the pledge to the taxpayer and the ratepayer to fix this issue. Now, we know under the previous council they had started, as staff have mentioned, with some programs at the end of last year, which we're seeing the fruits of their labor. But this council, 100% unanimous in tackling this issue. All of us up here, except for those 2 guys out in Ward 4, pay a water bill. However, the Ward 4 councillors have family and friends that live in the urban centre that pay water bills, and I'm sure they hear about it. So, but they are on board, and as you can see, both councillors ask questions, because in the past we've had Ward 4 councillors that, hey, it's not my issue, I don't need to ask too much. But it is a serious situation. We all heard it at the doors when we were there. I personally took it as to champion this with regards to helping our water rates here in Port Colborne. And I do applaud staff. They're coming forward all the time with new ideas, things that we can do. And as I've previously said, sometimes it's some upfront cost, which does, that short-term pain, but for long-term gain, you're talking about one service at $20,000 approximately a year in loss of water that everybody has to pay towards. We don't know what's out there, so with the amendment that's come through, at the end of the day, hopefully going into next year, that we can stabilize these rates and see a decrease to them. And that's on the fixed costs. And it was brought up earlier about what you use. It's cheap what you buy water for. People go buy a case of water at $1.99 when it's cheap. If you emptied all those bottles and filled them at home, it'd probably be less than a penny. So that's putting it into perspective. 24 bottles of water would be less than a penny if you drank it out of your tap. Yet you'll pay the $1.99 or $2.99 or $4.99 at the grocery store, or over $2 for one bottle at the corner store. So, but I do make that promise to our ratepayer that we will work diligently on this. We've all done that. We all did it at the door. We've sat here, we've talked about it, we've talked individually to staff about it. So, we just want the public to know that we are working hard and we will get to the bottom of this problem. If it's the last thing we do. So, with that being said, no more questions. Everybody understands the motion as amended by Councillor Bruno and by Peter with the decrease in rates. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item number 2, the memorandum from Chris Lee, Director of Engineering and Operations, and Darlene Sutter, Environmental Compliance Supervisor, summary of 2018 distribution system unbilled water. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Beauregard, Councillor Wells. Staff, do you have any comments or anything on that one? Not tonight? I mean, that's pretty much what you went over the other day? Okay. Any questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Item 3, Engineering and Operations Department Engineering Division Report 2019-30, subject memo on the proposed roadside ditching program and associated funding methods. I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Wells, Councillor Bruno. Staff, do you have any comments before questions on that one?
No, Your Mayor.
Questions? Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. I applaud Chris and the councillors that got this whole thing germinating into a report, and I have a couple concerns about going at this ditching program to the issue of in-house. And so I took on board the statements in previous meetings where there was certainly money left over at the end of 1 or more years because of issues to do with the contract or contractor of not getting it done, and that puts you even farther behind, notwithstanding the money is still there. I want to speak to the issue, though, is in all of this, is some of that a lot more, through you to Mr. Lee, an issue that also pertains to contract management. So let me throw out the scenario. Is we let a tender, hopefully there's a group of businesses out there that want to bid, they do bid, we award the contract. So some of the things in awarding that contract have to do with stipulations, i.e. when you're going to do it, how long it's going to take you, and demands that we can put in the tender in terms of you've got to satisfy it. So is this also not an issue of saying, the contract tender comes out early enough, Mr. Contractor, part of the conditions of this is you must be done by July 1st. And either there's a penalty clause in there, or barring July 1st, there's still August, September, October that he could do it in. Now, I would think that contractor wants to come back, he wants to get his money, he wants to get it done. So is there anything to the fact that part of the reason monies aren't spent have to do with contract tendering time and conditions in the contract and enforcing those conditions?
Staff?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruno. To a point, that can be part of an issue. In the contracts in the past, though, what we've actually done is the awards were made early in the year, like in February. So there was sufficient time for a contractor to come in. The issue that we've ran into in the last few years is multifaceted. One of them being is there's a number of municipalities that they come in and give good pricing to, and then they have literally more work than they can complete in a given time. And there was issues with locating. We've had problems with locates in the past. So a contractor would come in on a specific day, the weather wasn't good or whatever, or he got called away, now his locates have expired, now it's another 2 months for his locates, so that caused a logistics issue. But definitely there is a methodology within contract management that could potentially address that. There isn't anything written into the current contracts that we've let, but that's something that we could definitely investigate in the future if that.
Counselor?
Just the other side of that, I'm not opposed to looking at this with all the detail that not only you've provided and to have a robust conversation about it. I would, as bringing up that ditching issue originally, and I'm not saying that's what got this ball rolling, but it's a good aside if it did, is to Councillor Demery's point of, in terms of the robust tying this all together. I mean, on the surface, quite frankly, I'm not of the inclination to want to hire more people and do that in-house, but I've got an open mind to it. On the same token is, would love to see that all tied up with a bow on it that talks to this whole issue of ditching and spreading it out between urban and rural. How it's going to then be paid for. And I'm happy to even look at increasing that, because I think at the end of this, what I took on board from the comments through all this is, if you're going to get a ditch done in 30 years, that's not good. It's not good enough, and that needs to change. And some of the points I read on this issue may help address that. I guess I would just like to see it all tied into one package, more so that I know where I'm going with those costs and how they're ultimately going to be distributed not in the levy to certain homeowners. The concern in Ward 4 about some is drainage, some is true ditching. I just like to have seen that all put together before dealing with this, and unfortunately, you're under the gun for time to do that. But I'd like to hear what other councillors have to say.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. I'm completely in favor of doing this. I think that this pilot project could actually form the foundation to create this package that Councillor Bruno is talking about for the future. What you get from this, what you learn from this, can certainly help us build certainly the better mousetrap going forward. So I'm totally in favor of this.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bodner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think this Councillor Demery put it very well, that this pilot project, I think at the end of that will give us a truer picture. I'll let staff correct me if I'm wrong, but it'll give us a truer picture of what we think we can do in the amount of ditches, because I think the important thing is that we want to get the ditches done in a more timely manner than we have. If this can do it, and because we have so many municipal drains now that we're finishing, 2 basically this year and next, and a number coming on that'll allow us to do more ditching. Part of the problem was the drains weren't done, so you can't do a ditch and send the water to a drain that can't handle it. So now, if we get the drains done, we've got to get at those ditches. And probably Chris can expand on it, Mr. Mayor, if you let him a little more.
No, we're not going to let him go. Chris, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bodner and to the rest of council. As some of the councillors are aware, we've had some meetings with staff and with the councillors specific to not just ditching, but also the municipal drains. And actually, in addition to that, is that we literally had a meeting this afternoon with 2 other mayors and their staff, and we were looking at how we can work together in increasing our municipal drain program between the 3 municipalities, which we sort of nicknamed the South Coast. But anyway, aside from that, that's a program that we're looking actively as an organization here, but also in partnership potentially, or at least congruently with other municipalities. So there's a real need / upswing in the municipal drain process for a number of reasons, which we can discuss at great length, but some other time. But that being said, as Councillor Bodner had alluded to, once you do the municipal drain work, then that jumpstarts the roadside ditching program. And so for us to keep up with that escalated program for municipal drainage, we have to do something to address the need for that roadside ditching. If we don't, we're not going to be providing a level of service that our constituents are going to be demanding. And I think this is, the two go hand in hand. And with this proposal, as I had stated in the report, is that there would be funds allocated in wages and equipment to the drainage of ditches along the roadside. But a good portion of those will be actually charging back to the municipal drains that will then have routine maintenance. And it's staff intent that that would happen in a 5 to 8 year rotation process, where we would lessen the cost over time, as opposed to some of the costs that come out now, where we have some municipal drains that are estimated at $800,000 and $900,000 to do the works. This would lessen those amounts because they would be more frequent, but of a lesser nature. So the two of them sort of go hand in hand in this proposal. One isn't exclusive of the other.
Thank you, Councillor Bodner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Chris. Chris, because the question came up and it may not be as clear as we may like. We had in the report that the contractor was about a cost of $24 a meter to do ditch. And what was the city's cost per meter after we did estimates in that?
To you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bodner, our best case scenario based on what we estimated production levels could be with rental equipment and municipal staff was somewhere around $750 a meter. But our worst case scenario is we're approaching somewhere around 20.
Okay.
Councillor, yeah.
So hence this trial period, which at the end of it should give us a truer picture of where we're at per meter.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bodner. That is correct. There's some guesstimation, for lack of a better term, in this process because we don't know what kind of productivity we can actually get. We're basing it on what we think is a best case scenario and a worst case scenario, taking into account all the things that I mentioned earlier, from having location delivered on time to weather to all the other variables within that equation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bagu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. We do this 4-month pilot project. Some of our ditching will affect the Fort Erie side of the border, I would imagine, through drainages. Do we have some sort of cooperation with the town of Fort Erie? Like, we could do all our ditches here, but if it drains into Fort Erie, it's all for naught.
Chris.
To you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bagu. Actually, that was part of the reason for the meeting today, was to discuss those programs going forward where municipal drains go between different municipal boundaries. And we actually had those discussions, some of the initial, we're also dealing with Wainfleet on the west side, has the same scenario. So those are, well, as we speak, we are actually completing a drain that goes between Port Colborne and Fort Erie. Those works are just wrapping up now. We're investigating other drains like the Point Avenue drain, which runs between the two municipalities. So those are all reports that have to come forward. And with those reports, then we will have an assessment schedule which we can then build a watershed properly. And all those costs then can be put back to the appropriate properties in the appropriate municipalities where the benefits were reaped.
Okay, Councillor. Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Lee. Chris, just on the, can you give me a flavor of across, why don't we use Niagara because it's closest to home to us. Are there other municipalities in Niagara that have taken ditching in-house? And would you be able to give us who that is?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Bruno. The best example of that is Wainfleet. Wainfleet actually has a dedicated operator, and they have a couple of machines with attachments. And they do everything from not just the ditching, but brushing. So they have those machines in-house, and they actually have been for a number of years.
Right. Secondly, if I could, so walk me through the logistics. If this were approved, I don't know where you're at letting or having this year's contract done. So that would affect this year, I take it?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Bruno. No, it would affect this year because this year we haven't brought the report forward. The current contractor has asked to extend the pricing from 2018 into 2019, which is the $24 that you...
Right. So if we implemented this, this would circumvent that?
Correct.
So just on that, in terms of ramp up leasing of the equipment, but B, I want to get into the nitty gritty on staffing. So in this trial period, would it be one or two or more people hired? Would we use the existing crews now that are in your employment?
Chris?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Bruno. The intent with this pilot program, as you put it, would be to hire one full-time operator, and the rest of the equipment that would come in would be rental. So if we needed a dump truck for the day or whatever to haul materials, we wouldn't put those people in staff. They would just be on an hourly basis. And the numbers that are shown within the report reflect that.
So if on the one person hired, if this didn't come to fruition after the trial period, would that employee still be a permanent member of staff?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Bruno. Yes, that's the intent.
Okay, so we still would be adding a net staff member if we went back to contracting?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor, you would be adding a staff member, but you would be eliminating the contract costs from previous. So you would offset those wages with what you would pay a contractor to do with before. So there is no difference in the levy if you left it on the levy, or if you entertained other methods of funding that, then they would fund those wages.
Sorry, maybe I missed something in either your answer or my question. So in order to implement the trial program, you would hire a permanent member of staff. So if the trial program didn't prove fruitful, the leased vehicle would go back, but the employee would stay.
Chris?
Through Mr. Mayor to Council, if it proved fruitful, we would continue to rent the equipment or look at the options of buying or leasing. Those are all options, and those would be purely economic reasons, and then the employee would continue to stay. If we didn't follow that route, then that employee wouldn't be working here anymore. It's that simple.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. It was probably in your question that you lost it, so. Not his answer, no. Councilor Bodnar.
So I just have one request, that when we lease that piece of equipment, just because we're talking about the Point Avenue drain and Fort Erie doing their end, if we can get lights on that thing, we could go in and do that at night when Fort Erie isn't looking. We'll actually do that Point Avenue drain that we've been waiting for how many years now? So just get it quoted with lights on it, if you would, please.
Chris?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bodnar. Actually, the City of Port Colborne is taking the lead on that, and we will be initiating that report and that drain works, and Fort Erie will just be tagging along with us.
Good. So you blew our cover, Councilor. So, seeing no more questions. Now, based on the item 1 that we talked about, which was in the urban area, this is in the wheelhouse of our 2 Ward 4 councilors, because they have the predominantly way more ditches than in the urban area. So, and I know hearing that at the door out in Ward 4, they both spoke a lot about this, going door to door. So it's another avenue for us to move things along. So I do appreciate the two ward councillors, also Councillor Bruno, because through he and I, we kind of started this discussion and it morphed into this. So, and with staff working along with them, thank you guys. So we can get, you know, instead of saying things moving, we get water moving within the municipality. So with that being said, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. Okay, so we're on to item 7, presentation, which is a continuation of the 2019 draft budget deliberations. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think what I'm going to do, I don't think we have a lot to actually discuss going forward in the budget, but what I will do is a few items that are outstanding, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
But I will do a quick overview, so because it's been a month since we met last. And so what I provided council is there is an agenda. I provided to all of council, which
on your desk, guys.
Which looks like this.
2 pages on your
desk. 2
pages.
pages. So I have it up on the screen also. So item number 1, Mr. Mayor, was the proposed roadside ditching program, which you've just completed. And I will just quickly go through where we were from last time. Council did approve the storm sewer utility budget and removal of the storm operations out of the levy, thus reducing the tax levy by $185,000. Also, council approved to fund the operations center debt from the fire hall matured debt of $114,000, thus reducing the tax levy. Council also approved the funding allocations of the provincial OMPF funding and the OCIF funding, which were on page 7 and 8, so that was approved. And council approved the grants programs, and 2 particular areas was increasing the community grants by $10,000 to add to the $19,000 interest on the investment for $29,000. And reduced the feral cat grant by $5,000 and referred them to the grant program, or the granting program that we do have. Council also had a consensus that the capital levy increase would be $257,000, but sort of kept that open a bit. And council also had consensus on the all the unfinanced staff requests, of which there was a number of items that we went through and added to the levy, and we'll get to that, come to that in a minute. With that said, I'll review where we are with regard to the operating tax levy increase and how it affects the residential property. I will say that when we look at that, I do have the regional tax rates now, so I was able to incorporate that into it. The only item that is now missing is actually the education tax rate, but we can presuppose what that may look like. And again, all of these rates are subject to changes in any tax policy that the region looks at, and any tax ratio changes that they may look at. And the councillors that were here last year remember that they did change slightly the tax ratios of multi-res properties and commercial properties last year, which does have a direct effect to the residential properties. But we're meeting with the region next week to discuss those, and then it'll be brought forward to regional council. Outstanding decisions that we'll look at is, it was raised at the last meeting, or the P&H or the Goderich lease, that the net revenues that is subsidizing the tax levy right now still of $63,000, that be actually put into reserve, which would then increase the levy. And to discuss the Canal Days funding of approximately $50,000, potentially into reserve for new initiatives. And the marina surplus, which still, there is about another $10,000 still of marina surplus that's subsidizing the tax levy, and that be put into capital reserve. So those are 3 items that was brought forward by a couple councillors. With that said, then we'll look at possibly the final approval, hopefully, of the operating budget. And again, it would be subject to the provincial funding and the tax room that would be created by the education tax rates. And what I would do is bring a report back to council once those figures are brought in, and if we have to make any minor changes, we can do them at that time. So with that said, Mr. Mayor, where we were at is this is what we were debating last meeting, just a month ago, of which there was a number of items that we either added to the levy or reduced the levy by. And where we stand today is so the city's tax rate is up a little bit. The region's tax rate actually came down slightly along with the regional waste management. You can see that on the screen. And the education rate I've kept the same. With that, if you look at the screen, the assessment increase is from about 185,000 assessment on an average property to about $191,000. That's the phasing in of assessments. And the overall increase based on our tax levy increase of 5.45%, the actual increase to city taxes would be 4.72%. With the region's now tax rate included, the taxes would go up about 2.8%. For the region, general and waste management is 0.59%. I've left the education at the same. So overall, we're looking at an overall tax levy increase to an average residential property of potentially 3.67%. Obviously, if the assessment, I'll move this over a little bit, if the assessment of a property stays the same, and in some cases they do, or they go up less than to the $191,000, you can see here that the increase is very minimal. If obviously the assessment doesn't increase, the taxes are almost break even with regard to a property. So anywhere in between those depends on how much an individual property's assessment may have gone up. But right now on the average property, we're looking at about a 3.67%. So I will say, if I look at, just to give you an idea, in the last 2 years, the education tax rate has come down by 0.9. So if I put this at 16.1, which we come down by 0.9, what that does is it reduces the education tax rate, and you're looking at just over 3% increase, if that's what comes down from the provincial government. Even if it was 16.5, if it reduces down to 16.5, we'd be looking at a 3.36% increase, so just over 3%. So with that, we're looking at 3.67% right now, and we can anticipate that the education tax rate will go down. It's not going to go up, and so there's a little bit of room there that we have to bring in a rate increase of anywhere between 3.3% and maybe 3.5%, something around that neighborhood. But we still have a few items to discuss, Mr. Mayor, which one being the Godrich lease, which I've added into the spreadsheet that we do have here for council to debate whether or not you want to either phase this in over 4 years, and if you phase it in over 4 years, that's $15,750 that would be put into the reserve, to the reserve, which would be then added to the levy, or $63,000 in whole. So that would be the first item, Mr. Mayor.
So questions on the Godrich, Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. I pushed this forward, and I'm sure for the 3 members that are returning from the last council, it's something they didn't want to do, but we're in a situation to do. I mean, I think as a new council, we have an opportunity to right-size the ship in terms of that item. Monies were taken from a dedicated reserve. They were used for purposes that were well-founded there at the elevator. Having said that, we should not be using rent from the elevator to subsidize the tax rate when we have an obligation to have that reserve there. And same thing with the marina. While it's only $10,000, we got a report when we first took office that is going to need dock replacement there. In one fell swoop, I think we could turn the clock back to a point where we're not using those dollars when they should be going to a underfunded reserve for something that it was set up for. Now, having said that, I don't really want to see $73,000 added to the budget to make that bottom line go up. So I would propose that for 1 year only, we are trying to build a capital reserve fund at the tune of $257,000 a year, which this year was being upped by, I believe, 0.25%. So I'm still a strong believer in building that reserve, but if for 1 year only we didn't grow it at 257 and we grew it at 257 minus $73,000 for 1 year, we would bring the Godrich elevator back to being funded. We would bring the marina surplus back to going into the reserve. And I think overall we would be doing the right thing by how they were originally set up. Again, no disparaging those that did it. They did it for a valid reason. I wasn't there. I'm sure the reason was totally proper. But I would like to bring our setup here back to good working order, and that would be my solution, to have a zero impact on the levy number that Peter read, but lowering for 1 year only the increase in the capital reserve by $73,000. I'm not speaking to the Canal Days funding. I don't know who brought that up, but I'll let them speak to that.
Okay, sorry, Councillor, what was the amount again for the capital reserve?
It's 63 on Godrich going back off the levy, and marina surplus 10,000 going. So you take that as 73,000 combined.
Yes.
If you took the 73,000 off number 6 on our sheet here.
Yep.
And I had asked offline to Peter if that could be, because that's work that we might do or could put off, number 6. And the indication I had is it could be managed, but I'll let staff speak to that if they want to.
Peter?
For 1 year only, that would be lower.
Yeah, so it's 184.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I think what Councillor is referring to is adding, or $73,000 would increase for the putting the dollars into the reserve for the P&H lease and the marina, and reduce the capital levy increase from $257,000 to $184,000. It would have no effect on the actual tax levy that right now, but what staff would then have to do is Chris and I would meet and look at what is in the capital budget that we can reduce by the $73,000.
Okay, questions to that?
For next year.
For this year.
Councillor Bodnar.
Thank you. Just one correction. Councillor Bruno alluded to the 3 returning members. It sounded like they all voted to do away with that amount put away for the Godrich lease, and that wasn't exactly true. So just, you know. But I think that's a really good idea, that we have to pay the piper at some time if we ever tear that building down. And certainly the people that are on the council of the day will be very happy that somebody put money away for that cause. So I think that's the right thing to do. As far as the marina, the excess going back into that, we've kicked the marina around for years. Like, everybody has kicked the marina around, not making money, costing money, and everything. Finally, it's contributing to the tax levy. I don't think we should be then taking money from them when they got to come and ask for it again. It makes it seem like they are, you know, in the hole. So whatever they can make and be put away, I think that's the right thing to do, because they have they'll need more than that to, to fix those docks. So I think both of those things are good, and I'd certainly support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Demeray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, let me say thank you, Councillor Bodner, for setting that record straight, because we did not all support it. It's important. But I would just, I don't know why we're not just ripping off the Band-Aid and correcting this situation this year, rather than doing it in drips and drabs. Do it, get it done. What I'm seeing is it might make a $16 increase in the long run if we were to do all of this, but that's the most it would do. I think we should just rip off the Band-Aid and do it all.
So you're saying leave 257 and not reduce it this year, is what you're saying? So take the 63 and the 10
and
off
put it back, yeah.
Off the levy, put it back to those facilities.
Exactly.
And leave the 257 under the capital levy increase.
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Danch?
Just because I was one of those guys that was here, I thought the idea was to try and put some money aside for the day that when it happens, that we're going to have a couple bucks kicking around. So I think we need to leave that in there, because that's huge. I mean, the cost of demolition was up around a couple $1 million, I think, last time we talked. So I don't think you want to be deferring this time and time again. Thank you.
No, so that's exactly what they're suggesting. Taking it off levy and putting it back where you're saying it should go. That's what we want to do. Okay, Councillor Bruno?
Well, I agree with Councillor Demery. The reason I pulled it off the 257 was because we still got other items to go. And in the back of my mind was still the $100 potentially on the urban storm sewer. So you're right, it's not on the levy, but to a taxpayer, it's still going to be, if this is $80 and that's $100, they're going to look at what the real impact is to them. So I thought when you add that 100, it's starting to push, I think, the taxpayer to new heights. But
So-
I thought maybe if we wanted to leave it revenue neutral till we get towards the end, if that's possible.
Well, okay, so then let's do this. Let's take the 63 and the 10, and if it's consensus of council, we'll take it out of the levy, and then we can always come back to the 257 instead of doing all that at once as we go forward. Is that all right with consensus? So we're taking the 73,000, the Godrich and the Marina that's in the levy now, and putting it back to their respective reserves. I'm seeing head shake, so that's consensus. So Peter, if you can want to do that, if you want to show that. Okay. Next is the Canal Days funding. What's come forward then in conversation with Peter is that we actually take the 50,000, put it to a reserve, where the Canal Days Committee would come back to council with the ask before Canal Days. We may spend some of it, all of it, none of it, in order to, as staff said last time, make the experience for Canal Days better. I am working with staff and some of our contract people with regards to Canal Days to bring those costs down. So that's what we're hoping to do. So hopefully we can take that money before we would take this, but it does give that committee an opportunity to come back to this council with regards to that 50,000. So it's not just carte blanche. Is that a consensus that people would look at? Discussion on it? Councillor Clayliff, you said on that committee, is that okay? I know it's the first time you've seen it, but this was kind of a thing that came forward today with staff, with Peter.
You're saying that, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, you're just saying that basically we're saying okay to it, but well, it has to come to us again.
Our committee will come back to council if we want to dip into that and exactly what we want to use it for, just to make sure it's all right with council. I think council needs to have a hand in it over and above the committee. Okay, is that all right with everybody? Consensus? Questions? Yep, Mark?
Sorry, I just heard Councilor Bruno say, so the 50,000 is going to be added to the levy? That's...
Goes into the levy,
Right.
but it will be going to a reserve. Doesn't mean it's going to be spent. So if we find savings that we want to find this year, that we don't need to spend it or spend all of it, and it's on the whole event, not just entertainment, it's on the whole event itself. Originally, staff came forward with an ask for more about entertainment. I think it was consensus with, in having a meeting, coming back saying, look, we want to make the experience the best for everybody, that it shouldn't just be directed into one segment of our festival, that it can be used. You may take 10,000 and do something with it. It may bring a ship in or whatever it may be. But that we want to come back to you guys with, and I think that's only fair. Councillor Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. Is there any room to put this in one-time funding, or have we used that all up?
Peter?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We have identified all of the funds for one-time funding. That is in the first column here under the OMPF funds. So there's $340,000 worth there. You know, it's a matter of if council looks at those items and determines that we can put off some of those items and put the $50,000 in there as a one-time. That would be a decision council could make.
You want time to look at that, Councillor?
So what is in there, Mr. Mayor, is $36,000 for IT for new software and licensing, $10,000 for Bill 168 workplace risk assessments, $7,500 for environmental compliance, $10,000 for drainage work for the Zavitz drain, and we are putting in $75,000 towards the Young and Hoff Wagner drain. 15,000 towards Roseland for condition assessment, 14,000 for Overholt Cemetery to put money into reserve for future, $5,000. Well, this were actually the walkway is not being done, so there's actually $5,000 there because that's continuing to be outside. Putting $5,000 towards a public art reserve fund. 15 for the Parks and Rec locator map, which was part of the Parks and Rec master plan. 50,000 for an active transportation master plan. 10 for the Celebrate Ontario grant, which we've already spent, so that's definitely has to be there. Sports Wall of Fame, additional 3,000. Economic development strategy for matching funds. I mean, we've got 2,000 for the library. Update their website, 15 to start setting aside money for official plan review, and $20,000 for a crossing guard review of crossing guard locations, and then the $22,500 for YMCA. So there are some studies and things in there as to whether or not council wants to look at any of those. That's
okay. So consensus is to leave that 50 in a reserve for now?
Yep.
Is that consensus across? Okay, yes, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, so Peter mentioned 5,000 was up for grabs that we're not going to use. Should we put that towards the 50? Or Peter will just put it in his drawer and then we won't see it for a while. So.
Yeah, retirement party.
Is that the federal cap one?
No, that was.
So in essence, there is 5,000 there, Peter, that's already been spent that that really isn't not going to be in there.
true.
So we can make this
Just make that
45,000.
45.
Is that all right then? 45,000. But to take that 5 and it actually is part of it, so it's really 45 you're adding to a levy on a reserve.
Where is that 5?
Maybe this is through to you, Chris. The drainage work they talk about, that'll eventually come back to us in the allotment.
To you, Mr. Mayor, no, those are the actual city costs for their portion.
Oh, that's our portions for city. Okay, thank you.
I guess the question is, what's the timing on those two drains? Last year, Mr. Mayor, what we did is we set aside $100,586 into reserve for the Zavitz drain to be done this year, I believe, and we're starting to set aside money for the Young Hoff Wagner drain, and it depends on the timing of when the drains may be done, but we're starting to set aside those costs because that's the city portion of the cost for those particular drains that we would have to fund at some point in time.
Chris?
So you, Mr. Mayor, to Peter, the Zavitz drain is nearing completion now. There's one section yet that has to be final constructed. And the Young Hoff Wagner, We just got a report from the tribunal with their final decisions from their last tribunal hearing, and that's to go forward now, and the consultant will be going out to tender within the next month and a half.
So in essence, there is no more tribunals. They've gone all 4.
Correct.
Which has taken how many years, Chris?
25.
25 years to fix a drain, people. It's ridiculous. The red tape is ridiculous. So I think we should leave those in, because that one's going forward for sure, and the other one looks like it'll be finished shortly anyway. So I don't think that's anywhere you can take that out. So, okay. So did you show that in there, Peter? So those.
So what I've added, Mr. Mayor, is I have added the 63,000 for the Godrich lease, the 10,000 for the marina, and 45,000 for the canal days, which brings our tax levy to 6.14%. And when we look at the actual taxes, it's an increase of 5.41% on the city portion taxes, but overall be 3.71% increase to the average taxpayer.
However, that's with the school board being,
and that's with
the education being the same as what it was last year.
Oh, let's put it back. Let's put
Just
that
so we
back.
know.
So if we put that back to the education being the same, we're at 4%. And then if the education, that's overall, the education tax rate, if it shows that it's a reduction, then it'll be below 4%.
3.75, 3.8, somewhere in there. It looks like what you're.
Yeah, if we assume even 16.5, it only comes down 0.5. We'd be looking at a 3.7%, or $115 to the average homeowner annually.
Okay. Any questions? So depending on what the education does, we're anywhere from 3.7 or even a little bit lower to 4. Any questions on that? Okay, so at this time, Counselor, just a second? Well, just a second?
Yep.
Thank you. Before I go to Counselor Bruno, anything else to add?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Counselor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Peter. So what is that to the average homeowner, the 4.2, 4.02?
4.02. All right, let's put that back to 17. So we're looking at $124 annual to an average homeowner.
Well, I don't know if there's going to be any more debate on it, but I think that, to my earlier point, that if we leave the urban storm sewer at $100, like granted this is a one-time hit, the real number is $224. So I don't know if there's any discussion on that. I just wanted to I was just asking for clarification now.
That's fine.
Go ahead with. Yeah.
So, Peter, what Councilor Bruno asked for before under taking the 257 down to 184?
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yes. What would that do? For councils. I don't know what Councilor Desmarais was saying, but just to show you.
So, minus 73,000.
Half a point, Gary. Approximately.
So that takes us to 3.8% overall, or $117, so $7 difference.
So you leave it as well? Consensus is to leave the 257 in there? Or yes, 257. Counselor, yes?
Peter, the storm sewer was put onto a charge. It was taken off the levy. What did that work out to, like $15, $16 on everybody's taxes that came off?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, was $16 was the difference, and the difference though being that we would have to levy $740,000 to have the same amount of money going forward. So the storm sewer fees that we would be collecting would provide us with $740,000, which would pay for or cover the cost of the operations, cover the cost of the debenture for the Nickel area storm sewer, and then also being able to put funds away for future capital projects. Which means if we wanted to create that same amount of funding of $740,000, we would have to levy $740,000. And in doing so, it would be an additional $16 with the $100 fee on there.
So you took $16 off everybody's taxes by taking it off the levy and putting it on a $100 charge?
Yeah, I'll,
Just because I'm just saying it's not really $100, it's $84.
Yeah.
Not that it's a lot,
Right.
but just to.
So this is the chart that I provided. So the status quo taxes is $1,644. Is this figure here that I have there? So we definitely would have to have a tax levy increase of $300,000 to cover the debenture. That would be an additional $27 to the homeowner. In order to raise the same level of funding that the storm sewer fees would be, which is $740,000, that would be an additional $40. So in total, it'd be $67 that we would be an increase to the average homeowner. And we're removing the storm sewer budget out of the levy, which is about $17. So the difference between raising the $100 per household and or raising the taxes by $740,000 is $16 is the difference.
Okay, Councillor? Thank you. Councillor Bruno?
Just on that, and I appreciate that, Councillor Bodler, my concern was in that is that if we wouldn't have established a storm sewer levy, 300,000, is it 300? 440,000, no, sorry, 300,000 would have been in the levy in any other normal year to have completed the east side storm sewer. So it's fair to say that we would have, minus this new account over here, this new line, we would have been 300,000 to fund the debenture to do the storm sewer over there, because it always was in the taxes, and $16 or 185 425 for the storm sewer maintenance, which was taken out. So if you look at both those two, you're more like, I think, about $42 that would have been in the levy that now we're putting over here as another charge. The only thing that's changed is it's $219. But we have effectively, if we hadn't started the levy, we would have been at this, was it 124, Peter?
Correct.
124 plus 40 and change. One of the things we could look at is, I think we've done the right thing by establishing a storm sewer levy in principle. I think we've done the right thing in that it has to be funded somehow for work that's already done. So that 300,000 has got to be there. The 185, 425 being pushed over from off the levy to maintain storm sewers. If you're going to have a storm sewer levy, might as well put the storm sewer stuff in the levy. Agree. We could, because we haven't spent money on storm sewers for eons, is the balance of that $740,000 is $255,675, which if we did not put that in this year and lowered the $100 by whatever that equates to, we would have established the principle of having a storm sewer reserve. We would have paid for the stuff being brought off the levy. Just in the first year, we will have not raised any new money to begin a storm sewer replacement program. I would suggest that we bit off a lot. I want to have that line item levy there. but I don't think I can fully absorb funding it, in my mind, fully in 2019. And we're not going to be doing any storm sewer work in 2019 in terms of a project. So I come back to either the left hand or the right hand, but it's all the taxpayers' dollars at the end. Do we take money off the 257 capital reserve down by 80 some odd thousand, or do we take the full 255 out, or a portion thereof? I want to hear what other councillors have to say about that then current combined total of, was it $256 for the average house? I had 171 plus 85, or scratch something out there. It was 124, I beg your pardon, plus 100, which is 224.
Right.
So if 224 on the average tax bill is palatable to my colleagues, I should say for most part the urban ones, because the $100 is fairly significant. I think without that, it's not such a bad tax increase, if you had to have one. So I'd like to hear from some other councillors on if 224 is an acceptable number in their mind, or if they have any other suggestions besides mine to mitigate it.
Councillor Desmarais?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The 120, 24, 29, from what I can see, we're getting the bang for our buck there, and we're doing the right things with it. I don't have a problem with that. The $100, I do have a problem with it, but I know that it has to be done. The $100 for the storm sewer levy, yeah, that really does hurt, considering the increases that we're looking at all over the place. And I would like to hear the difference that it would make if we were doing what Councillor Bruno suggested and only putting part of that through. So if that would make a difference, I'd like to hear what the differences are.
Peter, you got a comment on that?
To you, Mr. Mayor, I think what Councillor Bruno was getting at is in looking at the storm sewer funding formula, in which we were collecting $740,000, $185,000 for the operating, $30,000, which is our own city costs. We would have $525,000 available from those $100 or from that fee schedule. We would have to cover our debenture costs of $300,000. So what you were looking at was we were actually putting $225,000 into a capital reserve for storm sewer in that year. And I think that's, if I'm not mistaken, through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Bruno, that was the dollar amount that you were thinking, how do we eliminate that $225,000? The only way that I could see that you would be able to do that is on that capital levy amount. Unfortunately, that's the direction we've been going in, and to increase our capital levy so that we're building towards our asset management goal. But again, that would be probably the only place that I can see that's directly affecting the tax levy without affecting the operations of the corporation. So in essence, what you'd be looking at is decreasing the budget by not just the $73,000, but almost the full amount.
Sorry, that's, if I could.
Councillor?
No, I think I'm fine with that ship sailing on the tax increase.
Okay.
My concern is that you could fully fund the east side storm sewer works that were done. You could fully fund the moving over of the $185,000 for its upkeep. You just would, in this first year, not fund, I had a difference in my math, 255, 675. So in other words, the portion not mandated would be, you would start your storm sewer fund with no reserves, and you don't have any reserves today. I would suggest that with 255 would probably take that $100 down by $22, $23, somewhere in there. And if that was the case, you could always start building your reserve in years going forward. But you don't have a storm sewer project on the books anyways.
No, but all due respect, that's what we've been doing. We just keep putting off, putting off, putting off, putting off. If you're gonna be serious about getting stormwaters in this community fixed, and we know the three main areas that have issues, some more than others, greater than others, you gotta start somewhere. It's gonna come forward at some point. At some point you gotta pay the piper. You know, I think if we go forward with a solid plan for this community, and then work starts in a short period of time where we have done basically nothing until this past term where they did the east side stormwater, it's never gonna get done. I understand what you're saying. So, you know, I'd like to see us start this so we can start work. Councillor Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you again. I really feel that we just have two choices. One, we go forward with the new storm sewer plan. We go forward with the $124 increase on the taxes. Or, if we can't stomach the idea of passing $224 along to our taxpayers, then we need to go back and look at the entire budget, strip all the studies, strip canal days, the extra money for canal days, strip everything down to bare bones, keep the storm sewer situation in place because you're actually building for a future here, and take a look at, and also return the funding to the reserves for the marina and the elevator. Do those things, but strip all the other things out. So either we can get rid of the glitz and glitter or not. It's our choice. But we have to be able to look at our taxpayers and say, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Councillor Bruno.
I would just remind us all that we did a storm sewer project for how much? 9 million? It might not have been all storm sewer, right? Or was it all storm? Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruno, it was about 95% storm.
Okay. So to your point about moving forward, I couldn't agree with you more. However, we moved forward with a $9 million project, got government grants, and did not have any funding for it until today. So hear me out. Hang on. We didn't have storm sewer funding. We're funding it through a debenture, which we were, for the first time, appearing in this account tonight. Is that correct?
I'm sorry.
So the first time, so we did $9 million worth of work. Mm-hmm. We didn't have any reserves for it, and we are now paying for it properly at $300,000 a year.
Correct.
So to the point of, if we need to do the next storm sewer, we will again debenture it, and we will again either attach that to a levy, the storm sewer account, or we will have money in that account and have to attach less money.
Exactly.
Okay. So my point is that in this year, when you're doing a dramatic big thing, and you don't have a project on the books, and if you do have one on the books and you do it, you won't be needing to fund it for a couple years by the time you A, design it, B, tender it, C, put it in the ground, and then you're going to attach a debenture to it. So if you do a 1-year pause in not filling this reserve, you haven't had any immediate effect on the system, and you haven't slowed down planning, tendering, or approving a project. And you're not touching, so I'm not suggesting we go back and look at the tax rate. I'm just saying that this is a one-time dramatic increase in the overall payout of citizens of Port Colborne, and that it can be mitigated without any effect, immediate or in the near future, on us, and doesn't preclude us from doing a project. So why wouldn't we grow that reserve over time, by the way, like we're doing our other capital reserve, and increasing it? So we are establishing that on the left side of the budget. We could establish it on the right side. That's all I'm suggesting.
Peter.
So now that I understand where you're coming from on that, Mr. Bruno, Councilor Bruno, what I did on the screen there is went to the funding formula or the fee schedule. So I'm not sure if this is what you're looking at, but basically, when you look at the funding, if we don't fund this $225,000, which is creating the reserve in the first year, and we're only requiring funds for the $300,000 debenture and our operating budget and our own storm sewer, that's $515,000 that we would need. So without changing the multi-res, commercial and all that, if we're just simplicity here, and changing just the residential single-family home, which is about 5,000 properties, down to $60 versus $100 brings us $536,000, so just over the $515,000 that we require. It'd be a small amount going in reserve, or it would be $56 or $57. I think that's what you were referring to, is reducing that number, but that's just reducing the single-family home. If we start reducing the commercial and industrial properties, multi-res properties, then this number would be reduced and the residential would have to go up to get the same $515,000. So if that's what you're looking at, just to give council an idea of what the result would be instead of $100 for the year, it would be $60 for a residential property on top of the $124.
Yeah, however, Peter, under line 2, you've got, if my eyes can, you've got multi-res from 2 to 5 units?
Yeah.
Is $175?
Correct.
Yeah, so if you divide it by 2 to 5 people, that can be almost about what you're paying for a single family anyways. So in essence, your rate is pretty close to being the same.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the alternative.
Well, not necessarily, Councillor, because if you look at a multi-res, you divide the $175, is that what it reads there, Peter?
Yes.
Divide it by the number of people that live in that residence from 2 to 5, if you take your average is 3. It's, each family's still paying the same. Now, they're not paying for it directly, it's paid by the landlord, who, but it's being paid by the rents anyways. You know, so there is a cost similarity there, because it's not being borne by one rent payer, it's being borne by the number, and then it goes even higher into larger buildings. So, you know, your largest cost there on a building, on a multi-res building, is
$275 for institutional and multi-res greater than 10.
Yeah, so you take 400 Steel where my mother lives, there's I don't know, 70 apartments in there. So now you got 70 families paying $275, like a share of that. So then they're less than a single family homeowner, if you put it in that perspective. So by reducing the, although I'd still leave the $100, but that's my opinion. But if you leave it at the 60, it's in line with what everybody else in generalities is paying. So it's not like, to me they can't, to me I don't think there is an argument.
And then you'd have to raise it to $100 next year to start creating your reserve.
Yes. I have 2 councillors down here, 3 now. Councillor Clayla first.
Just a quick question. I think, Peter, I spoke with you. I don't see the mixed residential there. I said I'd spoken to some of our people on West Street that have, like myself, with a commercial downstairs and residential upstairs. I was originally told it would be 150, and I said, oh, that's okay, no, but I don't see it there anymore. Mixed
residential?
It was a mixed. You had shown me that there was a mixed
Between commercial on the main floor and residential above, Peter?
Commercial with residential, mixed use residential.
Yeah, we didn't have a mixed residential. We didn't have a mixed, it was either residential or multi-res or commercial industrial.
So what happens when I have commercial on the bottom and residential on the top? Because I specifically came in and asked about it and was told that's what it would be. Because I had that question from several people on West Street who asked me the same thing, where they have commercial downstairs and residential. And I had told them what I had been told.
If they're classified as commercial, they would be charged the commercial fee. Would be that's the way I would look at it. If there's a commercial activity in the building, that they would be charged the commercial
but it's mixed because it's residential upstairs. And I specifically came in and spoke to you about it, and I don't know if it was you, Peter, I think, but I asked about it and was told that, and that's what I've been telling people on West Street. I said, not to worry, it's still going to be, it's higher than residential, the 100, but it won't be, because you're just a small unit with one unit upstairs, residential, and a commercial on the bottom. And I was given shown it on a sheet that that's what it would be, so I'm quite surprised.
Small commercial, councillor, is the same as 2 to 5 units.
Yeah, it's
$175. Would the majority of downtown?
Yeah, the original proposal was $300 across the board for commercial, whether you were small, medium, or large commercial. And then we put them into the tiering.
So,
but I was shown mixed because because I live in one. I came in and asked about it because I was speaking with people on West Street who have the same situation, and I said, okay. No, I went in, I got it all straightened out.
So to answer that question, Peter, would the majority of businesses
they would
in either the downtown core,
they would be a small commercial, which would be $175.
So it'd be the same amount of money anyways, councillor.
So it'd be 175.
Yeah,
right.
So item 2 and item 6 are exactly the same price.
Right.
So all they did was they took the term and changed it. Because there's only 10 medium commercial and 2 large commercial. That must be Frank's big store down on Main Street. One of the 2.
Where there's no parking.
You got lots of parking on your lot. You got lots of parking in your lot. You just bought a big lot next door and you got lots of parking on top. Anyways, so the majority there, councillor, under item 6, you've got 200, what is that, councillor Bodner? 200 and...
Which number?
It says number of 286 properties are small commercial. So that's the majority of your commercial in both downtown cores.
Yeah.
Correct?
Correct.
I think that answers your question, councillor. Instead of calling it mixed, they've called it small.
Okay.
Small commercial.
Okay.
But it is higher than I was told. So again, I'm going to have to go back to them and tell them. I said it's going to be 150 because that's what I was told when I came in. So.
We're retailers, we get all kinds of money.
Well, no, it's not changed. Yeah. But councillor, it hasn't changed. If it was the same as multi-res, it's $175. That number hasn't changed. All they've done is renamed it as opposed to calling it mixed use. They've called it small commercial. They've taken small, medium, and large. They reclassified them, but I think you're looking at the same chart. The dollars haven't changed on that chart, I don't believe, have they, Peter?
Just looking, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just looking back into my budget package. The option 1,
hey,
we did have an option 1, which was $150 for small commercial.
Sorry?
We had an option 1, which was $150. Option 2 was the $175. Then we did an average of $162, and we recommended $175.
Okay.
So one of the options was $150.
Yeah, so you're remembering prior to the final agreement with council. Really, no, seriously, that's what's happened here. It came forward as and this is what we ended up with. Well, it was a draft of it, so the council had to make a decision on this, and this is where they've come out to. If you want to make a recommendation to change that, by all means.
I'm just looking at the commercials on some of the ones on West Street where they have upper residences. They just have small businesses downstairs. And like I said, when this all happened, I really believed it was a good idea. I thought we needed to have the storm sewers. And then thinking it was 100. And then when I spoke with different ones, I said, it's going to be 150. And everybody seemed to be okay with that. I feel badly to have to go back now and say it got changed. I'm not sure when, because I came in and double checked it, went back and said, oh, I've checked it. No, it's right. It's staying at 150. So I don't know when that happened. But it just means another.
That's where, your worship, I guess to Peter, just in a sidebar conversation here with one of the council members, looking at, can you go back to the other page? that shows the reserve transfer. So if my math is right, if you cut every single one back to 75%, which is $25 savings for residential, your total take in column third from the right, working left, is 555 minus, I can't see, minus 300. Oh, sorry. Your number one column, fees collected, is 555. Take off the 185 and the 30 leaves you with 340. 300 goes to the debenture, 40 can go in the reserve. Takes $25 off the 224, that's residential, brings it down to 199. Takes almost $45 off of Councillor Kalaliff's class by reducing it by 0.25. So the new fee, Councillor Kalaliff, if it was 75% in the first year, would be 131 and a quarter. Basically, each of those would go down by 25% across the board. So
if you reduce each one of these by
every single
25%?
one, I assume that would reduce the, I don't know, you might have to type all those in there. That might be too much work for right now. And then next year, do the final quarter. That gets your net increase under 200 for taxes and storm sewer. I don't know if that's what council's looking for, a savings.
You're being efficient, Counselor, jumping the gun, going out, giving those numbers.
It's for myself, it's fine.
Yeah.
You feel badly when you've told people, you've come and you checked it, and you have to go back and say, and I go back and I say to them, oh, no, this is what it is, and then come back here today, and I say, when did this happen? I thought it was set. I thought the fees were set when I was showing them.
It's never set until the final vote's taken, and that's
I thought we had.
hopefully tonight, so, but let's see what Peter comes up with when he finishes this. What if you do just a small commercial, leave everybody else the same? Oh, it's not that much. You know what I mean?
All right. So,
yes, Counselor, while he's fixing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because Peter's kind of slow at math. Hey.
Jeez. Tough crowd tonight.
Okay, so,
tough crowd.
So I appreciate Councillor Bruno trying to, to keep costs down to the taxpayers, and I think we're all cognizant of that. But I kind of agree with the mayor in that the $100, we kicked this around, we come up with a plan, we had things set, and now for $25, we're kind of messing up the original plan. What happens if next year, this year we got a $124 increase on the taxes. What happens if next year we're asking for $250? And then we got to kick in the $100. Are we going to then reduce that $100 to $50 or $25? Like, is this I don't know. Is it? I think the original plan sounded pretty good, and having money in the bank, whether it's this year or next year, to start this project, I think is just like money in reserves. If you're going to tear down something, I think it's a good deal to have the $100 in there.
Okay. Done, Peter?
So reducing them all by 25%, so it's 75%, so $75 for your single family. Your small commercial would be 130, 31, and so on down, and that would raise $555,000. We need $515 to give you $40,000 in reserve, which I think was what Mr. Louis mentioned.
The CAO, his math is pretty good.
Not bad.
You're just slow pressing the buttons on the calculator, that's all.
It's a computer, anyway.
Okay, so, everybody sees that. Councillor Kalaliff, question to that?
I just want to say, I guess I'm listening to what Councillor Bodner is saying, and I understand, leave it the way it is, but I guess I'm just looking at, again, what Councillor Bruno is saying as well, and you're looking at trying to keep costs down for people, and I guess it looks like a lot when you're up over $200. I know I'll be hearing from everybody about over $200. So if we want to leave it this is for a good cause. This is for things that we need to do, infrastructure, stuff that has to be done. So I guess I'm with what Councillor Demers said, maybe it's time to cut out the glitz. And maybe we cut out somewhere else and we keep everything like we have it here. I don't, you know, I'm not sure, but we do need to bite the bullet on some of this stuff, and if we have to, we have to. You know, I can sell this being a little bit higher than what I had told them, as long as we're doing something with it. But if we're spending money on other things that they don't see as being necessary or whatever, I think that if we can show them good value for the money that we're spending, I think I'll be fine.
Thank you, Councillor.
And this I can sell as good value, but I can't sell them this is good value plus 200 something plus other monies to do other things that we probably could do without, you know, versus things that we have to get done.
Okay, Councillor. Councillor Borgard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to say that I support Councillor Bruno's position. During a time where the taxpayers are facing an increased levy, increased funding, it seems like everywhere in terms of the water, the levy, and all that, and the fact that there is no real projects coming about in the short term, I think a cost savings of some sort is beneficial to the taxpayer, and it would be nice to do so only for this year, and then moving forward we do put money in the reserves. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bruno.
I'm just gonna push this one more time with Councillor Clayle. At the end of the day, if we have to go back and find $25 out of a budget that we've debated 3 or 4 times, that everybody's had a kick at a can at, that's fine. But to save $25 on the right-hand side of the equation in this, to create a reserve that we haven't had for 30 years, will now not have for 31 years. Seems to me to be a small price to not dig into core services in the tax rate. Doesn't preclude projects going forward. It allows you to take the edge off a big bump for this year. And it's all the taxpayers' money, whether you call it the levy or whether we call it the urban service area storm sewer. It is a way of going forward on our core businesses, doing those studies that we have to do, and paying our bills. As I've said, if this hadn't been formed, your tax rate would be up by another $300,000 to pay a debenture that we've already paid. I mean, again, we've established a great process here. $100 is a round number that, I'm not saying it was arbitrary, but it did provide for some reserve. So now we're having a $40,000 reserve instead of a $255,000 reserve. To me, that's not the end of the world. We're establishing something we've never had. We're putting things in the proper silos. And again, we don't have a project on the books. We don't have any tenders out. We're not doing anything for at least a couple years. You could try and raise that $25 we're cutting this year over 2 or 3 years. But to me, to go back to the levy and think that there's glitz in there, when we could easily find this $25 now, that's part of a fund that isn't going to do anything for 2 or 3 years. Just seems to be a rather straightforward way of being able to still accomplish both over time. It's just going to take an extra year or two, but it's not impeding any progress whatsoever. Whereas I think when you go into the levy, any of those projects I think we've debated here that feel they're worthy. I mean, I think The budget is the heart, is the main aorta in the city. And this is something that's great to have, but you don't have it this year, you can have it next year. And you can catch up that $25 long before a project's even ever gonna hit the ground in Port Colborne. That's all I'm saying. I'm just finding it an easier way to take the edge off what is a one-year spike in the normal routine. Thank you, Your Worship.
Can I answer? Sorry.
I've got Councillor Demery, then Councillor Clayliff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Just to Councillor Bruno's comments. First of all, I'm not in opposition to what you're proposing. I just don't support it. There is a difference. And when I talk about glitz, seriously, and it's not flip-flopping, that's how it is what it is. When I talk about glitz, I'm talking about anything that is absolutely necessary for the city to go forward. That's what I'm talking about. And there's lots of it in the budget. There's lots of it in every budget. No matter what you do, you can find those things. So, but when I talk about pipes in the ground and we look at wastewater, I think that's essential to the city going forward. So I would just rather we did it once and did it all. I don't think the taxpayers are going to be happy with, are going to be content with a savings of $25 when they're going to get hit with over $125. I just don't think that's going to make a big difference. And I think if you're going to do it, get it done, do it right, and show them that you're responsible. That's all I'm looking at.
Okay. Councillor Clayliff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Councillor Bruno, I wasn't disagreeing with you. That's why I was smiling, because basically I'm saying exactly what Councillor Demare said. Even we don't need. You can leave that the way it is. And when I'm talking about glitz, I'm not talking about anything. I'm saying you can even say Canal Days, the 50,000. There's all kinds of things, small amounts, things that we've done. I guess I'm feeling like, but in agreement with you. I'm worried about raising taxes and plus that extra 100 or 175, because now if you've got a small business, it's 175 plus the tax increase. You're talking a lot more than $200, okay? So we're just talking about small residential, $225. Sure. So, and you look at the increased costs and you look at small businesses in town, are they making enough money? Is there all this extra money, we're always asking them for more, we want them to do more and be involved in more. I think we're going to get some kickback. But on the other hand, I know we need to do it. So it's such a tough one to try to figure out how do you make it palatable. How do we make it palatable? And, that's the tough one. And whatever we do, we have to really be firmly behind it to be able to explain it to people and have them understand the reasons why we're doing it. That we're, hopefully in future it will bring things down.
Councillor Baggio.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Senator, would you have a bottom line on the percent tax increase as of right now, right this minute? Projected tax increase?
3.71.
Okay.
Right now
with everything we've gone through, everything has to be improved.
Oh, with the $100? You're talking about?
Yeah.
For everything that we put in now, we're at $124, 4% increase.
4%.
Overall, with all agencies.
So that's
everything. The region and the education. Yeah. And that's without the education reducing.
Which we think it will. Okay,
okay.
So
basically the bottom line is this, like we have to live within our means. People here are not making a lot of money in this city. We're expanding a little bit, not much, a little bit. But basically, to tell you the truth, I will support anything over 3.5%. So to me, that's my number.
Okay.
I don't care how you find it.
Well, that's I was going to bring that up, Councillor. Yeah. So if we can do this in two parts, then. First part is let's deal with this what we just finished talking about, the sewer system. So really, option one is the original proposal that Peter brought forward that we talked about earlier. The second proposal is the knocking off of approximately $25. Okay, councillors? Councillors, you understand that? Just so we know, so everybody's on the same page here. So we're going to have two options you're going to vote on. One is the first option that was brought forward by Peter, the original that started off at the $100. The second one is the reduction that brings it down approximately $25 across the board, give or take. Does everybody understand that? So with consensus, option one is the original, all in favor. All opposed? That's carried.
Which is carried.
So it's 100, the original
Full amount.
full amount. I had to break the tie and I voted in favor of the original.
$100. Okay.
Well, I spoke on it and that's why I'm gonna
Yeah,
vote.
yeah.
Okay, that's number one, so that's now taken aside.
So, and
Well,
I'm not sure I understood. So we voted on $100, yes or no?
yes, the original sewer plan as proposed.
And that was defeated.
No.
That was carried.
Then I incorrectly voted. I didn't hear your question correctly. I'm sorry.
You voted against it.
I voted against.
Did you want to vote in favor of it?
No.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I put up my hand the second time, which was against, right?
You voted against it.
I voted against.
I know that. Do you want me to tell the public again that you voted against it?
No.
Okay.
What I'm trying to get at is what was the vote?
Should I get Michelle when she gets back tomorrow to put on a Facebook thing that Gary Bruno voted against
I
us?
am trying to get at how many voted yes.
It was 4-4 and I broke the tie. Yeah.
That's all I'm asking.
Only because I spoke in favor of it, that's all. I spoke in favor of it, I'm not going to vote against what I'm talking about, so, but that's fine.
I didn't see
Yeah.
total, that's why I asked.
Yeah, okay.
Original.
So that, well, this is just to get it back to Peter to bring the whole budget forward, which will be to us in 2 weeks. Trying to get this done as easy as possible so we all understand. Things can always change until, and Councillor Clayliff has learned this, until the actual final vote is taken. This is fluid. Now, on the main budget, we have an increase, Peter, of I'm sure it was 3.7% or something.
With the original, with the everything in now, which is the, we added in 45,000 for like canal days, 63 for the lease, Godrich lease, and 10 for the marina. Brought it from the 3.76.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Up to the 4%.
Because we didn't reduce the other one, the other portion that Gary had brought.
We didn't take anything out
Okay,
of the capital.
so without changing anything, with putting everything that we've talked about this evening, we're at 4%.
Correct.
So, do you want to bring that forward to reduce that
By using that other,
capital levy increase?
257,000 minus that,
So it brings it down to 184?
yes, I would.
So we talked about this earlier. If you take the capital levy increase right now at 257, but reduce it by using the 63 and the 10, it brings it down to 184. So this year it's 184,000 opposed to 257. The capital levy increase.
So you're taking the 63 and the 10 and not putting them into reserve?
No, you are. You're just not. It's being revenue neutral.
Okay, great.
Okay. So if that's the case, Peter, what does it bring it down to?
Minus 73. 3.8%, $117.
Okay. So you got 3.8%. You have one counselor here that asked for 3.5 that he'd be happy with. So you got to find 0.3%, which is equal to how much money?
Well, if the education comes down.
No, aside from that.
Aside from that?
Aside from that.
Okay.
I think Ron's got his hand up.
Just, can I get through this one first? Thanks. Then I'll come to you. I'm just trying to answer this counselor's question.
This
Yeah.
Do you want to know what will take us down to the 3.5?
Correct.
Peter, can you get your microphone on, please? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Why do I keep forgetting that today?
He's thinking of retirement.
Let's see what 25,000 does for us.
51,000?
Oh.
I commented, I just want the counselor to know what it's going to take, that's all. I'm trying to answer the counselor's question, or have staff answer that.
Almost there. But
So you're close. So how much is that?
yeah, we're looking at 80,000, I believe. Takes us 3.57.
How much does? 80,000. 80?
So about 80,000, okay. Yeah, I'm gonna come to Counselor just a sec. Okay, we got it close there, Peter?
We're close.
Okay. So to basically bring it down to 3.54%, you're about 80 grand?
100 takes you to 3.51.
So 100,000, okay. So you understand that, Counselor, right now? Okay. Counselor Bodnar.
Sorry, my response was then he's got to tell us what he wants to cut for 100,000. That's, you know.
Correct.
Yeah, so.
Correct.
Okay.
Counselor.
The other councilors help in deciding?
You certainly can. Oh, I've got one counselor going here first. So I'm gonna let him go first? Well, I'm gonna let him go first.
One item, Councillor Begu and councillors, is the firefighter memorial for $30,000. I don't really see any necessary need for it now. Maybe in the future we can look into it, but that is just one item that I would put forward.
Where is that? Where is that?
It's on page 38 of our.
That's in the capital.
So that's in the capital, correct?
And it's 5 up from the bottom.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Mayor, we are cutting out 73,000 out of capital, and we'd have to determine what projects would be out of that capital.
You got that?
So yeah, so what Councillor Bogart is mentioning is $30,000 for the firefighter memorial, which is in the capital, I believe. Of which, so right now what we've done, what Councillor Bruno's done is we've already reduced the capital budget by 73,000. We'd have to determine what of the projects on the sheets of page 737, 38 is going to make up that $73,000. Whether it's the fire memorial or maybe it'd be $73,000 that we'd have to find elsewhere, plus the $30,000 that he's talking about there. So it's a matter of where you want to cut. If you're cutting it out of the capital levy, then we have to go back to the capital levy and determine which projects we want cut out.
You can put that forward. I'll take it as a motion if that's what you want.
Yes, I will.
Okay, so I have a motion on the floor by Councillor Beauregard, seconded by Councillor Danch, to reduce the capital budget by $30,000 for this year for the fire memorial.
On top of the 73 that Councillor Bruno already brought forward?
Yes.
Well, not necessarily. We're starting with the 30. We haven't voted on that yet.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll come to him next. So, any questions to the councillor on that? On that specific item, the 30,000. Everybody understand what we're voting on, councillor? To reduce it by 30,000, the capital budget is coming out of the fire memorial. On that one?
So anything that comes out can go back in at the end of the day if we are kicking around. This is just to try to get to a dollar figure.
Correct. Correct. So, any questions to that? All in favor? Carried. Councillor Bruno.
Thank you, Worship. I'd like to call the question on 3.8%.
So you're going to call the question that the budget increase is 3.8%.
Yes. That's the 73 that I identified being taken out of the capital budget.
Well, you've already got 30,000 coming out here, so you've got 103,000 coming out.
Less than 3.8. Yeah. I'll withdraw.
You withdraw it at this time?
Well, how much do you have coming up? Now we've got 30,000 that's been identified.
Yes.
To come off the capital.
So you can bring the 73,000, we haven't touched that yet, to bring it down to the 184, the capital levy from 257 down to 184. That was what you originally talked about.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. That's what I thought I was
Yeah.
putting forward. That does not include Councillor Beauregard's 30 then. My original motion, my original
Ask.
was 3.8, which just shifts that 73,000 for the Godridge elevator and that off. That would bring the total levy down to 3.8. That's what I'd like to bring forward. You're saying that I can't do that because there's 30,000 here, or are you not saying that?
You can. Councilor Beauregard can come back and add it back in if he wants, if he agrees with you. I have no issue with that.
Just for clarification then, Councilor Beauregard identified a specific $30,000 item, which I've taken off. Councilor Bruno has identified $73,000.
That's right.
So it's a matter of, are we reducing by another 73,000 on top of the 30, or 43,000 to accumulate to the 73,000?
It's up to these 8, so I'll.
Exactly.
So
if you want to put that on the floor, to reduce the capital levy from 257 down to 184.
I do.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councilor Bodnar. Any questions to the councilor on that? Then you defeat it. I'm just saying, if you don't want that, then I can't not take a motion. So what we're doing is we're taking the capital levy increase from 257,000 down to 184,000.
Which changes the levy to 3.8%.
Probably a little less now because you've taken 30 over.
Because you're already taking 30 off.
Okay? But aside from that, I'm just dealing with your motion right now.
Well, sorry, then I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, but I'm still confused. I don't want the 30,000. I want to leave that in. And what you're suggesting is I can't because it's been passed.
Or you can make a motion to put it back in by, well, it's fluid, guys. I mean, until the final one comes forward, it is fluid, but.
Well,
to be quite honest.
I mean, if we had a 4.0% increase, I had 3.8. Others wanted to reduce it and brought forward a way to reduce it, as Councillor Bodnar said. To me, that doesn't take away from whether we want to go back and start at 4, vote at 3.8, vote at 3.8 plus another minus 30. I don't understand why we don't do it that way. We have a number that's there at 4%. If people aren't happy with 4, they can vote for my 3.8. If they aren't happy with 3.8, they can vote 3.8 minus 30,000. If they're not happy with that, they can vote for Councillor Baggio's 3.5.
Mr. Mayor?
And we're not happy with that one?
Keep
what do we do?
Suggesting new ones.
They come back next week?
Like, that's a lot simpler.
Yeah,
because you know what? If
Hey,
5 people vote for one thing, it's over.
Councillor, I have a solution.
Okay,
Councillor Beauregard, if we take your 30 just to add it back in, and then look at what Councillor Bruno's proposing, which really brings us back to where we were when we started this. Are you okay with that? We were trying to get to that number anyways. He's saying by taking a larger chunk, you can leave that in and still get where you want to go. That's all I'm asking. You don't have to do it.
No, I'm not.
Mr. Mayor, maybe I can show you on the.
Yep.
Right now, I've taken the 30,000 off the levy.
Yeah.
I've also taken Councillor Bruno's suggestion of 73,000 off the levy.
Yeah.
Which takes us to 3.72%.
I want to leave the memorial in. So why don't we vote on all the ultimate tax rates that have been proposed here tonight? The 4%, the 3.8%, the 3.8% minus the $30,000, and Councillor Baggio's 3.50. And the first one that gets 5 votes is our budget.
What I
just a second
suggest is take a vote on each item individually and see what passes by council. That's how we do it.
Well, yeah, but Andy, if you want 3.5 or 3.7, you just don't vote for
So Councillor Bruno, in essence, we voted on that. So it's a reconsideration. I have gone to the counselor, he can withdraw that. It's up to him. But right now, I don't get a yes answer, so.
I don't plan on withdrawing.
Okay, so right now we have the budget with the first item coming out as a 30. The next item is yours coming down to 184 on the capital side, which was the 70 some odd thousand you were talking about. Do you want to proceed with that one? Which brings it down to basically where you were at 3.72%.
Which would include removing the memorial,
Yeah,
correct?
which has already been voted on.
And that's basically the only option.
Oh, look when this budget comes back finally, you can throw stuff in 2 weeks. But I'm trying to get through to this evening so we can come with a number for staff to bring a budget back to us.
I thought Councillor Beauregard just withdrew that.
No, he said no.
He did not? Okay, sorry.
He said no.
Okay.
Which I gave him the option, but that's
Great.
fine.
No, that's fine.
Okay? So do you want to proceed with your change on the capital levy?
I will on the basis that it can be added back in. Fine, I will proceed. With the full, my 70, his 30.
Yeah, okay. Question
Thank you,
before I
Mr.
ask for
Mayor.
a seconder?
Before I know we're going to take this to a vote and that's fine, but before we do that, this is almost embarrassing, this back and forth. Like, this is ridiculous. We're all adults. We should be able to read these binders. If we've got a suggestion of cuts to make, we should be making them, not going back and forth and trading things off at the last minute. But anyway, go ahead and put the motion in front.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a question answered, that's all, Counselor. Can I have a seconder for Counselor Bruno? Okay, so I've got a seconder with Counselor Bodner. Counselor Bodner.
So if we go with Councillor Bruno's suggestion, through you to Peter. Peter, we still have to find $73,000 worth of cuts in the capital levy, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we do. As to
Okay.
what particular items we would cut.
So we kind of wasted the 30,000. That could have been put against the 73,000. I'm just throwing that out there, you know. But
yeah, that's fine.
It's in the capital levy, right? That 30,000.
Correct.
That's correct.
Yes. So, okay.
All right. Questions to that motion that's on the floor? So right now, you're voting on taking the capital levy from 257,000 down to 184,000, which brings your tax increase to 3 point.
Clarification, it's actually bringing it down an additional 30,000 with Councillor Beauregard's.
But you've got that in there.
Yeah, but it's still coming off the capital
I understand
levy.
that, but if you take the 30 then plus this amount, it brings it down to 3.72%. Is where you'll sit, just so you know.
So the capital
Okay,
levy
Counselor?
becomes 150,000.
Does everybody understand that? I just want to make sure. Okay, all in favor? All opposed? So that's defeated. So, if you leave that in, Peter, at 257, what is the tax implication?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, leaving it at 257 would actually reduce it by 30,000 because we're taking
We've
out
done that,
the fair
yes.
memorial, so it brings it to 237 actually, the capital levy. We're at 3.93%.
Councillor Demery.
Never mind.
Okay.
So, I think, just through your worship to council, I think what's going on is that we're going through some things that have already been approved at different stages of the budget. To Councillor Demery's point, there was a number of opportunities. Now, this is absolutely council's budget, not staff's budget. If you want to take something out, now is an opportunity.
right.
I would suggest that there was a better opportunity a couple of weeks ago when we were at the first and second budget meetings. But I probably, to Councillor Bruno's suggestion, would take a vote at 393, which I think was what Councillor Bruno was trying to do before we got into individual line items. And if 393 isn't going to be approved by council, then we can look at what gets us to the next number. And I think the example of vote and vote and vote until you get to the number that 5 people want is probably the appropriate course of action. Or send staff back and have a 4th budget meeting. Send staff back to find X number of dollars in savings. But these are items that have already been through the budget ringer once or twice.
That's right. Peter, can you just throw up on there? So at the high end, we're looking at 3.93. If the rate for the education comes in what we think it will be, which was around 16, I think it was, from 17 to 16, just so we know what the low end could be.
3.37.
Okay.
We went around this a little bit.
So you're basically Council, you're basically, depending on what the education tax does, 3.4 to 3.9 is your tax increase as it stands today. Yes, Council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Did we ever have an option to vote on the entire package as we finished the budget presentation? I think it was 4%. Did we actually vote on that? No.
Well, nobody
because
brought
that's
it up.
what we should have done first, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, we should have done that first. So I'd like to put that back on the table.
At 4%. Yeah. That's fine. Seconder? Okay. Counselor, you, okay.
So how was that?
So, through your worship.
You can't go back in unless, right?
So through your worship to Councillor Bodner, there's the outcome and there's the process. And I know that what the outcome is that you want, but I think there's gonna have to be a process, because you did ask the chair, the mayor, if we could go back in, and he said yes. But I think the manner in which it goes back in is that somebody who voted against it in favor of it the first time, is gonna have to move that it goes back in, or move that it gets reconsidered, get a majority of council, a seconder and a majority, then vote on the original question again and see if the vote is less than 5 in favor of it, so that it's defeated. And then you're at 402 or 4.02, or the number that Councillor Demery wants to vote on before making any further cuts, including the cut that was already made.
Question.
I voted for it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to bring it back for reconsideration. And in that, okay, how do we do that
That's the end,
first?
full stop.
That's first.
We need a seconder.
Okay.
Seconder for reconsideration. Councillor Demery. Okay. So you're reconsidering the 30,000 back in. Okay, so that's this. Oh, sorry. All in favor of the reconsideration? Of reconsideration, to bring this back.
To bring the 30 back.
That's right, that's what we're voting.
Not to deal with the 4.0.
No, Gary, we're just dealing with the 30.
Firefighters Memorial back in the budget.
Okay, put up your hand so I can count, please. Put up your hand so I can, thank you. That'll carry. So now it's on the floor for reconsideration. Now we have to reconsider it. So, that's just, we're going by procedure. That's correct. So, yeah, now we're voting on the reconsideration to put the 30,000 back into the budget. Does everybody understand that? Okay. All those in favor? That's carried. Okay? Now, Councillor Demeray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, can we please vote on the 4.02%, which would be the final budget number that we ended up at the end of the presentation? So, and if we need to make changes, we can do that after that, but I'll put that on the floor.
Can I have a seconder to that? Councillor Wells. Okay, now Peter, just so we know, at the high end, we're at 4.02.
Correct.
With the education, would bring it down to what? Just so we know.
3.46.
So we're anywhere from 3.46 to 4.02 based on the education change, if any. Just so everybody knows that, because, yeah, all right? So I have a mover and a seconder. All in favor of that motion? That's carried. Okay. Anything else? So Peter will come back in 2 weeks, Peter? 2?
Through your worship to council, we have a regular council meeting March 25th, which is 3 weeks from today. But the alternative is, do we have all the tax rates, all the tax ratios? Could you bring a final report, or do you want to wait for education rates?
Through Mr. Mayor, we usually, actually it's 2 reports. We usually will bring a report that passes the budget, and then we bring a report that brings forward and passes the tax rates. So I would suggest the report we can bring back to March 25th, and if we have the tax rates, I can bring back both at the same time. But it's a matter, usually it's a process of passing the budget, and then you pass the tax rates based on the budget.
Okay. That's right. So on the 25th, Peter will be bringing back what we've talked about tonight for the final vote, which means that will be the budget. If in the meantime you have changes, let staff know and bring those to council that night. All right? Okay? So, yeah. Yeah, I got it. So, we're on, in the green pages, we're on item 8. I need a motion to adjourn from this portion of the meeting. Councillor Danch, Councillor Wells, all in favor? Carried. Okay, to your blue pages. I'll call to order the special meeting of council for this evening. Call to order. Introduction of addendum items, Madam Clerk.
The bylaws will be changed based on amendments that were completed during the water portion of the budget.
Thank you. Confirmation of agenda. Councillor Desmarais, Councillor Bruno. Questions? All those in favor? Those are carried. Any disclosures of interest? Items of consideration. The Corporate Services Department Finance Division Report 2019-29, subject proposed 2019 water and wastewater rates. Okay, we know what those changes are from the green pages. Item 2 is a memorandum from Chris Lee, Director of Engineering and Operations, of Darlene Sutter, Environmental Compliance Supervisor, summary of 2018 distribution system unbilled water. Item 3, Engineering and Operations Department Engineering Division Report 2019-30, subject memo on the proposed roadside ditching program and associated funding methods. I'm going to do these in block. Can I have a mover? Councillor Danch, Councillor Bodner seconds. Any questions? All in favor? Those are carried. Madam Clerk, consideration of bylaws.
6648-12-19 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 3151-22-95 as amended, a bylaw to regulate the supply of water and to provide for the maintenance and management of the waterworks and for the imposition and collection of water rates. 6649-13-19 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 3424-6-97 as amended, being a bylaw for the imposition and collection of sewer service rates and sewer rates. 6650-14-19 being a bylaw to adopt, ratify, and confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Port Colborne at a special meeting on March 4th, 2019.
Okay, do those in block. Mover. Councillor Desmarais, seconder Councillor Bruno. Any questions? All those in favor? Carried. Our next meeting is March the 11th, which is a regular meeting of the council. Anything else? Motion to adjourn. Councillor Danch, Councillor Beauregard. Questions? All in favor? Thank you. Staff, great job. Councillors, good job.